We're good? Now?
Awesome, awesome. How's everybody doing tonight? Good, awesome. Well, hey, it is great that you are able to join us tonight here for just an awesome presentation. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist with Dr. Frank Turek. And I just want to thank each and every sponsor of the event here tonight, each and every club, each and every church. You can see their tables out there. Man, there are some individuals that have just been such a big help. So if you can give it just a round of applause to each and every person, you know who you are, that have helped with this event. Yeah, awesome. Thank you, thank you. Awesome. Well, hey, we are so excited for tonight. I am so excited for our speaker, Dr. Frank Turek. Some of you may be familiar, some of you not. But man, you are in for an amazing night tonight, an amazing presentation tonight. So why don't you just give it up for Dr. Turek.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, Aggies. Let's go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position at his feet. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on the loudspeaker in the town mosque yelling, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward, chest first, onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two teammates lying at his feet receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room of the White House to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Mansour's high school in Garden Grove, California built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, North Island, California, just outside of San Diego, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet, 𝗧𝗜𝗠𝗘𝗡𝗧𝗦 class. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship, named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? The answer is someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, a lot of people don't think the story's true. After all, it was written down by religious people. We know religious people tend to embellish things. And it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. How many people in this room have ever seen somebody dead for at least 36 hours, then rise from the dead? Yeah, none of us. How about people out there on the internet? You ever see that? No, neither have I. Yet if you're a Christian, you got to believe in something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes. And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity is true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Mine? Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah. That is actually from our TV show, which is on every Wednesday nights, which would be like right now. The show is on. 9 p.m. I shouldn't be here. No. 7 p.m. here in the Mountain Time Zone. It's on DirecTV. It's on Roku. How many have Roku? Anyone have Roku? All right, look for NRB TV on Roku. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, it's on this brand new technology sweeping Logan right now. It's called the Internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, it's actually on our website, crossexamine.org. We're also on radio every Saturday mornings here it'd be 8 a.m. Now, if you're a college student, I know you don't get up until the crack of noon on Saturday, so you're not listening to it then. That's okay. The podcast is called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, so you can listen to it whenever you want. Whenever you want, what we do is we present evidence for Christianity, and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And this is going to serve as our outline here tonight. First question, does truth exist? Why is that important? Because you hear people saying there's no truth. You got your truth, I got my truth. All truth is relative. You've heard these claims, right? Well, if there's no truth, quite obviously Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there's no truth, atheism can't be true either. Right? By the way, if there was no truth, could you call somebody out on a lie? No. Lies presuppose truth, right? Of course there's truth. If there wasn't any truth, would you even go to school? I mean, why are you here? You're not here to learn opinions, right? You're here to learn truth. Would you ever read a book? No, you wouldn't. We're going to deal with that question first. Second question, does God exist? A lot of people don't think God exists, but I hope to show you tonight that not only does God exist, but we have 3 arguments where we can show, without any reference to any religious book, that there really is a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things. In fact, you can establish the fact that God exists without any reference to any religious book. The third question is, are miracles possible? And today, of course, many say miracles are impossible. But I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible has already occurred, and even atheists are admitting the evidence for this miracle. We'll look at it tonight. Then we're going to get to the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we can see if the documents we have are historically reliable enough to let us know if one particular event from the ancient world took place. What would that event be? The resurrection, right? Because if Jesus rose from the dead, game over, Christianity's true. Of course, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, it's false. You might as well sleep in on Sunday and do what you want the rest of the week, because if Jesus hasn't risen from the dead, as the Apostle Paul himself said in his first letter to the Corinthians, your faith's in vain. Do you realize Christianity is a worldview that you can investigate and get evidence for and see whether or not it's true? It's not just somebody's philosophy or somebody, I said this was true. There's evidence for this, and you can look into it. Now, from this point, You can go further, and the book goes into much more detail where you can actually conclude that the Bible's the Word of God just on the authority of Jesus. You say, well, how can you do that? Why would you do that? Well, because Jesus claimed that the Old Testament was the Word of God, and he promised the New Testament. You say, why trust Jesus? Look, I just have a personal policy. If somebody predicts and accomplishes his own resurrection from the dead, I just trust whatever the guy says. All right? So what we're going to do here, after we go through these 4 points, is we're going to have time for Q&A. We have the mic set up. Actually, tonight, I don't think we're going to do Q&A. I think we're going to do all Q, no A. All right? So everyone can ask a question, takes all the pressure off me. All right? Now, we'll have Q&A later, so just hang on for that. But we're going to start right here at point 1. Does truth exist? You guys ready to go? By the way, I'm going to go through a lot of slides quickly, and I want to tell you at the end of this, I'm going to give you a way to get all the slides for free. Okay? So if you think there's something here you want to remember and you're trying to write it down, don't worry about it. I'm going to send you the slides. Okay? All right? So that way we can move quickly. And I always move quickly because I'm originally from New Jersey, which means I speak at 150 words a minute with gusts to 350. Okay? All right. So we're going to start talking about truth. And whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, Colonel, I want the truth. And Nicholson said, Aggies. Aggies. If he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere. You can't handle, that's not how he said it. Here's how he said it. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. All right, let's try it again. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth. Now that felt better, didn't it? Didn't that feel better? Didn't you always want to do that in college or at church? Just yell, you can't handle the truth. Well, what I'm going to do in this segment is, last night we were down at Utah Valley University, and we gave this same presentation, but I spent a lot more time on points 1 and 2 than I will tonight. I want to spend more time on miracles in the New Testament, so I'm going to greatly abbreviate what we did last night, and if you want to see more, you can just go to our YouTube channel, Cross-Examined YouTube channel, and you can see the entire presentation from last night, all right? But let me just review what we did last night. What I want to show you here is one of the most important thinking skills I've ever learned, and I didn't know it. I already had a master's degree, and I didn't know it. I was 33 years old, and I didn't know what I'm about to tell you right now to show you what a dimwit I was. I was never taught logic. And learning logic is so important because it can help you avoid what is false. Half the battle is trying to figure out what's false so you can concentrate on what's true. And this thinking skill will help you discover what is false. And if you haven't noticed, there's a lot of false statements and philosophies in our culture right now. How can you identify them? Here's the way you can do it. If someone were to come up to you and say, there is no truth, you should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yeah, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Can everybody see this is a self-defeating statement? It defeats itself. What's a self-defeating statement? A self-defeating statement doesn't meet its own standard. A self-defeating statement violates the law of non-contradiction, which says opposite ideas cannot be both true at the same time and in the same sense. It's just a fundamental law of all thought. A self-defeating statement would be like if I got up here and said, I can't speak a word in English. What would you say? You just used English to say it. Or if I said my parents had no kids that lived. Or my brother is an only child. Or everything I say is a lie. That's right. Some of you will get that tomorrow. Or all generalizations are false. Some of you will never get that one. All right. And here is the way you can identify self-defeating statements. What you want to do is you want to turn the claim on itself. Turn the claim on itself. So if somebody says there's no truth, you turn the claim on itself and you ask, is that true? All right. Let's just do a few more. We did many more last night, but we don't have time. Probably the most popular one you're going to hear today is this. There isn't the truth, only my truth. Right? You have your truth, I have my truth. You live your truth, I'll live my truth. We'll all get along. It sounds like we ought to all agree with this, right? It sounds so Oprah, right? It sounds like everybody should just agree with this. There's just one big problem with it. What's the big problem? It's logically self-defeating. Why? Because if somebody says there isn't the truth, only my truth, you just ask them, is that just your truth or the truth? In other words, is this statement up here just your truth? If it is, then why should I believe it? It's just your opinion, right? But if you're saying this statement up here is the truth, well, the first half of the statement says there are no the truths. Do you see that this is a the truth statement saying there are no the truths? It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. I know this is unpopular in our culture today, but there's no such thing as your truth. There's no such thing as my truth. There's just truth. You might as well say you have your own math if you're going to say you have your own truth. I mean, imagine if Matt hired me to come over his house and do something. Like he said, come on over, I need some work done. I'll pay you $10 an hour. Just tell me how many hours you worked, and then I'll pay you. So I go over his house. I work for 15 hours. I say, Matt, you owe me $150,000. He goes, I don't owe you $150,000. I owe you $150,000. And I go, no, you don't understand. I have my own math. He's going to go, you're crazy. There's no such thing as my math or your math. There's no such thing as my truth or your truth. There's just truth. Now, sometimes it's said this way. It's true for you, but not for me. Well, Christianity may be true for you. Buddhism's true for me. Let's all get along. There's just one problem with this claim. If you turn the claim on itself, what would you ask back to somebody who says this? This is the interactive portion of the program. Close. If somebody says it's true for you but not for me, you simply ask them, hey, is that true for everybody? Is true for you but not for me true for everybody? Because if true for you but not for me is true for everybody, then true for you but not for me can't be true because it's true for everybody. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Actually, there's a more fun way of dealing with this. Let's suppose you're driving down Highway 15 out here. You're going 100 miles an hour. Cop sees you, pulls you over, walks up to the car, knocks on the glass. You put the window down. He goes, you were going 100. It's easy to get out of a ticket. You simply say, ha, that's true for you but not for me. And you speed away. Would that work if somebody tried that? Would that work? No, that wouldn't work. No. If you were really going 100, that's true for all people at all times in all places when referring to you at that time. It's just true. By the way, I go to a lot of churches and I normally ask people, do you think Christianity's true? Most people will say yes. And then I'll say, why? Do you know what answer I get more than any other? Because I have faith. Is that a good answer? Does your faith change whether or not God exists or Jesus rose from the dead? No. Either God exists or he doesn't, regardless of what you believe about it. Either Jesus rose from the dead or he doesn't, regardless of what you believe about it. I mean, do you have to believe in something to make it true? Do you have to believe in gravity to stay on the ground? Do people who don't believe in gravity float away? Hey, look, there's another one. Hey, if you believe, you'll come back. No, that's not the way it works. You say, why is the Bible always talking about faith then? Because there's two kinds of faith. There's belief that, and then there's belief in. Belief that is getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that the New Testament writers are telling us the truth. That's what we call apologetics. Doesn't mean we're saying we're sorry. It means we're given evidence for what we believe. But all the belief that in the world won't get your moral transgressions forgiven. For that, you got to go from belief that to belief in. In fact, there's a difference between belief that and belief in. For example, James, the half-brother of Jesus, who wrote that little book in the New Testament called, Aggies, you are sharp tonight. He says even the demons believe that God exists, but they tremble. Do you know that if God exists and demons exist, they know that God exists better than we do? Right? But they don't trust in him. Why? They don't want to trust in him. You see, belief that is just of the head. Belief in is not only of the head, but of the heart. In fact, we know this in relationships, the difference between belief that and belief in. When I first met my wife 37 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife. But all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife. And in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. That's the difference between belief that and belief in. Now, most of the time when the Bible's talking about faith, it's talking about the second kind. After you know that Jesus is the Savior, trust in him. But if you don't want to trust in him, you don't have to. God's not going to force you into heaven against your will. If you don't want him now, you're not going to want him in eternity. So always recognize there's a difference between belief that and belief in. You can know something's true and still not apply it to your lives. You can know it's true and still reject it because you have free will to do so. Now, how about this? You hear this quite a bit. You ought not judge. Jesus said don't judge. Why are you judging? All right, set Jesus aside for just a second. What's the problem with the claim logically? It's a judgment. So if somebody says you ought not judge, maybe you want to say, hey, isn't that a judgment? Or if we're not to judge, then why are you judging me for judging? You say, well, didn't Jesus say don't judge? Nope, never said it. Sure he did, Frank. He said it in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1. It's right in the middle of the Sermon on the Mount. All right, I know it's going to sound weird for a minute, but it's true. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. Do you think when Matthew was writing his biography, which we call a gospel of Jesus, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1? No. When were the chapter and verse divisions added? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is important. Why? Because if you didn't have numbers in there, it'd be hard to find your way around. Imagine you went to church one Sunday, your Bible didn't have numbers, the pastor's Bible didn't have numbers, and all he said was, let's go about 2/3 of the way in, let's see if we can find the same spot. No, you wouldn't be able to do that. So it's important to have numbers. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want. You can't do that. You got to read around the passage. What does the whole passage say? Judge not, lest you be judged by the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be very able to help your brother. And then don't throw your pearls before swine. Man, there's a lot of judgments in there. You notice that? He calls people hypocrites. He tells them not to throw their pearls before swine. Jesus is not telling us not to judge. He's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. He's simply saying, don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Why? Well, first of all, it's a judgment itself. And secondly, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments getting over here tonight. Good choices from bad choices. Safe choices from dangerous choices. Everybody makes judgments. Atheists make judgments. What judgments do they make? There's no God. Jesus didn't rise from the dead. There is no objective meaning to life. When you die, you're just going to become worm food. It's hopeless. Have a nice day. These are all judgments. The question is whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? And Jesus made a lot of judgments. But we've got to make judgments without being judgmental. Now, we could go through many more of these, and we went through several others last night, but I got to move on. All I want to do is point this out. Can everyone see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everybody see that? You know what this means? That relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. And unfortunately, many universities are teaching relativism and postmodernism. Why would you pay for that? Now, you can't get away from truth. Well, actually, you can get away from truth temporarily. How do you get away from it? You suppress it because you don't like it. And we all do this on occasion. In fact, here is a picture from the University of Wisconsin at Madison, which loves the Bible about as much as the University of California at Berkeley does. And so I was there not long ago, and we had the mic set up like we have tonight. And when we do Q&A later, I may ask you a question. But it's not fair for me to do that unless I tell you what the question is in advance. So I'm going to tell you what it is right now so you can think about it. When people get up to the microphone and they express any hostility at all, or even if they say they're not Christians, I may ask this question. The question is, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had atheists stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no. No? How's that reasonable? How's that rational? You wouldn't believe something if it were true? Well, it's not reasonable. It's not rational. The problem isn't here. The problem's here. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God of their own lives. They're not on a truth quest. They're on a happiness quest. And they're just going to believe whatever they think is going to make them happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy doing a lot of selfish things and fun things over the short term, but over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in this room over 40 knows what I'm talking about because many of us have tried it ourselves. Yeah, you just keep following your heart wherever you want it to go. You're going to wind up broke, addicted, alone, and eventually prematurely dead. You can't follow your heart without moral restraint. You've got to guard your heart. So I may ask you that question later, because I've noticed that many people are looking for God like a criminal's looking for a cop. They're not interested. So always ask the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? By the way, that's a fair question for anybody to ask of somebody else. If Mormonism was true, would you become a Mormon? If atheism was true, would you become an atheist? If Islam was true, would you become a Muslim? Pascal said something pretty famous and insightful. He said, people invariably, almost invariably, base their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive. Are we just believing stuff because we find it attractive? Or are we believing it because it's true? Well, let's go on to the next question. Does God exist? And normally I spend about 40 minutes on this question. I'm going to spend maybe 15 on it because, as I say, I want to get to miracles in the New Testament. I'm just going to summarize what we did last night. And again, you can go to the YouTube channel to see the whole thing. But is it true that God exists? And I mentioned there are three arguments for the existence of God that we normally talk about. The first argument is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Cosmological comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe, and it says if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose, and it says if there's design in the universe and design in you, life, there's got to be a designer. Now, these two arguments have some scientific evidence behind them. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature. Yet it's the argument we've all understood intuitively since we were very small children. And it's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one. Like it's wrong to torture babies for fun. Or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust. Or it's wrong to invade a neighboring country without provocation. Then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no God, all of that is just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against the baby torturer's opinion. That's just your opinion against Hitler's opinion. That's just your opinion against Putin's opinion. If there's no standard beyond humanity, everything's a matter of opinion. And I see a lot of people out in our society who are claiming to be atheists at the same time claiming they have rights. Do you realize there are no rights unless God exists? It's just your preference. It's just your opinion. We'll take a brief look at that later, but we got to start right here at the cosmological argument. Now you got to admit, it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. Some of you said, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Now, this is the argument that says, that many say, points back to the big. Now, I know there are probably some Christians here saying, Frank, you know, we're Christians in here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists are admitting it. For example, Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 5 years ago, put it this way. He said, almost everyone believes that the universe and the time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the data. And this is the standard view in the scientific world now. 100 years ago, virtually no one believed the universe had a beginning. They thought it was eternal. Actually, about 120 years ago. Now, ever since Einstein, beginning in about 1905, now we have a bunch of scientific evidence and even philosophical arguments that say the universe had to have a beginning, and even atheists are admitting it. Now, here's the bottom line. We don't have time to go through the evidence here right now, but the bottom line is this. Well, first of all, the evidence is in the book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And it's not controversial. Atheists are admitting it. The only question is, what could have caused the universe to come into existence out of nothing? And here's my point on this. If space, matter, and time had a beginning out of nothing, what could have caused that? It couldn't be more space, matter, and time. It couldn't be nature. Nature didn't exist. It must be something that transcends space, matter, and time. It must be something that's spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create. Why personal? Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Impersonal forces don't make choices. The being or cause would have to be intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? You say God. Well, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet. We haven't done enough research yet. This could be Allah or some other theistic or deistic God. We don't know if this is the Christian God. If we go through the rest of the questions and we realize that Jesus rose from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,989 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We don't know it yet, but at least we've got 6 attributes of what could be the God of the Bible. Second argument is the argument from design, the teleological argument. There's 2 aspects to this. One aspect is the universe appears to be designed, and the second aspect is that you appear to be designed, life. Let's just take a brief look at the universe for a second. Scientists have discovered in recent decades, probably the past 70 or so years, that the universe is fine-tuned. That if you were to change any one of a number of factors virtually imperceptibly about our universe either wouldn't exist, or the universe would exist, but it no way could support life. In other words, the universe seems precisely tweaked, A, to exist, and B, to support life. I'm just going to give you 2 of more than a dozen of these parameters. Change any one of them, we don't exist. Here's one. If the gravitational force were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power compared to the strong nuclear force, we wouldn't exist. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I, so let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent from El Salvador, or Panama, all the way up to Greenland, and stack it in dimes all the way to the moon. That's about 230+ thousand miles. And then do that on a billion other North American continents. Mix all those dimes together, mark one of them red, put them in that huge pile, put that red dime in that huge pile, mix it all up, blindfold a friend, throw him on the pile, have him pick one randomly. The chance that he would pick that one red dime is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Do you think he's going to pick that red dime? No. You say maybe this happened by chance. Ladies and gentlemen, chance is not a cause. Who caused this? Chance. He was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. You know what scientists mean when they use the word chance? We don't know. Look, there's only 2 possibilities. Either that value was designed or it wasn't. What makes more sense? It was designed. Even Christopher Hitchens, who I debated many years ago. You guys remember Christopher Hitchens? Brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. Remember him? He said this is the hardest argument to deal with as an atheist. Why is the universe so precisely fine-tuned? Seems like there's a mind behind it. Also, the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, and all that distance is necessary for us to exist here on Earth. If it was different, we wouldn't stay in orbit, which means we couldn't actually live, obviously. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is that? Far. Take you at least 2 tanks of gas in a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. A number of years ago, my wife and I took our 3 sons when they were small out to the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona. If you ever get to go to Tucson, go on the south side of the city, other side of the mountain. If you go out to this Desert Museum at night, on a clear night, you can see thousands of stars in the sky. So we're out there this one night, and the guide says, wow, it's so clear tonight that if we look up at 9:03, we will see the space shuttle in orbit. I said, oh, come on, we're not going to see the space shuttle. It's only 120 feet long. It's 350 miles up. We're not going to see it. Oh, me of little faith. At 9:03, the guide goes, look! And we look up in the sky about 70 degrees above the horizon. There's an object streaking across the western desert sky relative to us about like this. I mean, it's really cooking. When it got right about here, it disappeared. I don't know whether Scotty beamed it up or what. Actually, what happened was, despite the fact that we were in total darkness, the space shuttle was so high up that the sun was still reflecting off of it, and when it got out of the range of the sun, we couldn't see it anymore. Now, when the space shuttle was in orbit, the space shuttle was traveling at about 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. You'll be here. Imagine, 5 miles a second. Well, how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away in our galaxy, 30 trillion miles? How long do you think it would take us? 5 miles a second. A long time. You must be a math major. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, in other words, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years, you would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. We could hardly get out of our solar system. You know how long it took us to get to Pluto? 9 years. 9 years to get to Pluto. Now think about this. Our solar system, if it was the size of a quarter, so think of a microscopic speck of dust, in the middle of the quarter is the sun, on the edge of the quarter is Pluto. You know what the next nearest star is? It's 2 football fields away. Forget it. And that's just in our galaxy. And here is what the psalmist says. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. Well, how high are the heavens above the earth? That's a good question. How high are they? Well, the Hubble Space Telescope helped us discover that. Do you see this right here? This is the southern hemisphere. Along the bottom here, these are mountains here, okay? What I'm going to show you is something that the scientists did with the Hubble Space Telescope a number of years ago, where they trained the Hubble on 1/26 millionth of the sky. What's 1/26 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, put a piece of rice on the end of your finger, hold it up. That piece of rice represents about 1/26 millionth of the sky. So they trained Hubble for about 11 days of exposure time on this one little speck of sky. This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. You can Google this. You can see this little composite video I'm about to show you. It's in the public domain. When I show you this video, what you're going to do is you're going to see the constellations come up, and then Hubble is going to zoom out to this 1/26 millionth of the sky spot. Okay? There's no audio. It's just video. Are you ready? All right, here we go. Hubble Ultra Deep Field. There are the constellations. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky, each galaxy having billions of stars of their own. Now, how many stars are there in the entire universe? If you find 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky, how many stars are there in the entire universe? The number of stars in the entire universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches, on all the earth, times 100,000. And to go from one star to another star, going 5 miles a second, will take you over 200,000 years. Now you know what the Bible means when it says the heavens declare the glory of God. When you look to the sky and you see stars equivalent to sand grains on 100,000 Earths, and it would take you over 200,000 years to go between just two of those stars, you get an idea of what the majesty of God is like. You get an idea of what infinity is. And even that's not infinite. By the way, I only showed you the first half of the verse. Here's the whole verse right here. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those that fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far as he removed our transgressions from us. The first half of this verse is actually scary. Why? Because if it's trying to communicate to us the infinite nature of God, that means God is infinitely just, which means none of us are going to make it because we've all been unjust. But since God is also infinitely just and infinite in every attribute, he's also infinitely loving. So how is he able to remove our transgressions from us as far as the east is from the west? He has to punish us, otherwise he's not just. So how does he not punish us and allows us into his presence? He punishes himself in our place. And there's nothing you can do to earn that. Your works, your good works, do not cancel out your bad works. Since God is infinitely just, he has to punish you, unless he can rightfully punish an innocent substitute in your place. And then you can take that forgiveness upon yourself. And that's what Christianity is all about. It's about forgiveness and grace. There are no works you can do that will cancel the bad works you've already done. And since God is infinitely just, he has to punish you, unless he can punish someone else in our place. Who can he find to do that? Only himself. The rest of us are guilty. So he adds humanity to his deity, comes to earth, allows the creatures that rebelled against him to torture and kill him so he could take our punishment on himself. And your way out of punishment is simply to accept that, to repent of your sins and accept it as your own. No other questions asked. Now, there's much more in the presentation last night. If you want to go further, let me just say one thing about the moral argument. Ladies and gentlemen, how do you know that your quarterback throwing a touchdown is better than your quarterback throwing an interception? How do you know that? By their works. Not really. What do you have to know in order to know the touchdown is better than the interception? Not just the rules. The what? Homeschoolers, help these adults out. You got to know the purpose of the game. If there's no purpose to the game, you can't say this play gets us closer to the purpose and this play takes us further away. That's the only way you can know the touchdown, because it gets you closer to the purpose or the goal, is better than the interception, which takes you further away. Well, the same thing is true in life, ladies and gentlemen. If there is no purpose to life, you can't say, here's the right way to live it because it's getting us closer to some purpose, and here's the wrong way to live it because it takes us further away. If there's no standard outside of ourselves, everything's just a matter of opinion. And notice in football that the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. When the Chiefs or any football team shows up to play football, the field's already set. Everybody knows what the purpose is. Everybody knows what the rules are. The rules are set by the commissioner and the owners, which they tweak them sometimes every year, because those come from outside the game. Now, the rules of football are arbitrary. They could be different, but the rules of life are not arbitrary. The rules come from outside the game, but they're not arbitrary because they come from the creator and the designer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, is the purpose of a football game to obey the rules? Be careful how you answer. No. If you're on a football team and you just lost 42-0, you walk off the field and you go, hey, coach, I obeyed all the rules. What do you think your coach is going to say? So what? Shut up. That's not the purpose of the game. It may help you achieve the purpose if you obey the rules, but the purpose of the game is not to obey the rules. The purpose of life is not to obey the rules. The purpose of life is to know God and to make him known. And once you know God, you will want to obey his commandments because you love him and you love others. But without God, without a commissioner, nothing's ultimately right or wrong. Yet everyone in this room knows some things that are right and other things that are wrong, which means you believe that God exists. Now, if we were to add up all these arguments, what can we conclude about the cause? From the cosmological argument, we can see that the cause of the universe is spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent. And from the design argument, we can also see he's even more intelligent and he sustains the universe. I didn't have a chance to give you that argument here, but it's in the video you can watch from last night. And from the moral argument, we can see that this being is also moral. So we've got a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator who created all things and sustains all things and is also moral. These are the attributes of the God of the Bible, and we haven't even opened the Bible yet. This is how you can demonstrate that God exists without any reference to any religious book. The question is, how do we know who the true God is? If we know there's a generic God out there that looks like it could be the God of the Bible, how do we know it's not Allah or some other theistic God? For that, we got to go to the third question, and that is, are miracles possible? But before we do, I know some of you are thinking, Frank, atheists have to have good arguments against this stuff. No, they don't. I'm telling you, they don't. Atheists don't have arguments for the way the universe is the way it is. What they have are complaints about the way God's running the universe. And in fact, nobody put it better than C.S. Lewis. I can't say anything better than C.S. Lewis, so I'm just going to show you what he said. And here's the context of this quote. Most of atheists you're going to talk to today are materialists. And if you're an atheist here today, thank you for coming. Maybe we can dialogue a little bit later. What is a materialist? Somebody that thinks there is no spiritual realm. All that exists are molecules, physical things. And everything's driven by the laws of physics. You may think you have free will, but you really don't, because every thought you have and every action you take is driven by the laws of physics. You're a molecular machine. You're just a moist robot. according to most atheists today. Well, here's what C.S. Lewis says about that. It's a two-slide quote. Check this out. He said, suppose there was no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. As John Madden would say, boom. You can't say it better than that. Atheists have to steal reason from God to argue against him. They have to sit in God's lap to slap his face. Now, how can we know who the true God is? For that, we've got to go to the question, are miracles possible? And actually, this doesn't take very long to establish. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. Let's go back to before there were any mass communications. Let's go back, say, 500 years ago. If one king wanted to communicate with another king over a great distance, how could he do so? Pigeons. He could use pigeons. What would the pigeon carry? A message. And what would be on the message? Not just written words. What would have to be on the message? A seal, right? There would have to be a seal on the message to say that this message came from the king. Now, it seems to me that seal would have to have a couple of characteristics. Number one, it would have to be unique to the king. Why? Because if everyone had the message, then you could send false messages from the king, right? Number two, it would have to be difficult to forge. Because if you could forge the seal, again, you could send false messages from the king. It seems to me this is the purpose of miracles. Miracles are like a seal that comes from the ultimate king. Why should anybody believe, say, Moses? Because Moses can do miracles. Other men can't do miracles. Moses can. God is letting people know that you ought to listen to Moses because he's my messenger. I'm putting this seal of a miracle upon him. In fact, you could put it this way. What's the purpose of miracles? The miracle confirms the message. The sign confirms the sermon. Now, how many miracles are there in the Bible, approximately? Does anyone have any idea? 110 in the New Testament. How about the whole Bible? What do you think? Excellent! That's a homeschooler back there, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, give him a round of applause. Yes. It's about 250, depending upon how you count them. Now, we tend to think miracles are occurring all the time when we read the Bible. That's not true. Let's take the 250 miracles approximately that are in the Bible and spread them over 2,000 years, just from, say, Abraham to Jesus. I know there's miracles on each side of that, but that's just a round number, 2,000 years. If you have 250 miracles over 2,000 years, how often do you get a miracle? Yes, one miracle every 8 years. Is that a lot? No. By the way, do they happen like that? Do you get a miracle and 8 years later you get another one? And then 8 years? No. When do you get miracles in the Bible? They occur in bunches. When God is doing miracles through people, they occur in bunches around these three areas. Around Moses, Elijah and Elijah, and Jesus and the apostles. Why? Because these people have new revelation that needs new confirmation. They have a new message that needs a new miracle. They have a new sermon that needs a new sign. So people are going to say, oh, this guy speaks for God. He can do miracles. That's the main purpose of miracles in the Bible. Now, sometimes God does miracles directly, but when he's doing them through people, he's doing them in these time periods. You know, there are periods in the Bible, hundreds of years, no miracles going on. Why? Because there's no new revelation that needs new confirmation. Now, the problem for people today is they think miracles are impossible. For example, Noah and the ark. Christians, can we just keep this between ourselves? Can we all agree right now that Noah and the ark is crazy? Come on, it is. And resurrections. I already asked you, how many people here have seen a resurrection? Nobody has. Yet for you to be a Christian, everyone has to believe something that none of us have ever seen. And for some reason, the big problem miracle is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? I mean, what is the deal with Jonah? Can you really believe in Jonah? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? No, the resurrection's easy compared to the greatest miracle. Yes, the greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, ladies and gentlemen, every other verse is at least possible, right? I mean, if God can create the universe out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible inside the universe? Of course he can. Now, I just said something some of you may not agree with. I just said God can do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible. You may have thought, well, I thought God can do anything. No, there's many things God can't do. He can't do logically impossible things. Like he can't create a married bachelor. It doesn't exist. I know some guys try, but no. He can't create a one-ended stick. He can't create a five-sided triangle. Doesn't exist. He can't create a square circle. Doesn't exist. Can't create an honest politician. I mean, in fact, there are some things you can do that God can't do. What can you do? Sin, lie. If he could lie, then he wouldn't be the standard of truth. If he could change, he wouldn't be the perfect standard. What's he going to change from? Perfection to imperfection? No, those things are against his nature. He is the standard. He can't do those things. Now, I just mentioned that Genesis 1:1 is the greatest miracle in the Bible, and if that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Here's the most interesting part of this, in my view anyway. Even atheists are admitting the evidence for Genesis 1:1. Again, they don't think it's God, but what else could it be? They're admitting the data that space, matter, and time had a beginning. If space, matter, and time had a beginning, and God created the whole show out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants inside the universe? Can he do the Noah miracle if he can create the whole show out of nothing? Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course resurrections don't occur, unless God exists. Of course Jonah's silly, unless God exists. In fact, Jesus related two of the most controversial miracles in the Old Testament to his own life. Notice he said, just as Jonah and Noah, he said, just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 hearts in the 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so I will be in the heart of the earth. And he said the same thing, people will be eating and drinking as in the days of Noah. Do you think Jesus thought Noah and Jonah were historical or hysterical? Historical. He thought they were real. So, if God can create the universe out of nothing, any one of these miracles is possible. Now, I know there's a lot of people that don't believe in miracles because they've never seen one. That's not a good reason to disbelieve something necessarily. Why? Because you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. Like what? Well, you believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now. You believe in the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics. Have you ever seen them? No, you're using them right now. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? Oh, you may have seen people treated justly or unjustly, but you've never seen justice in itself because it's not a physical thing. It's an immaterial reality grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen love. And everyone believes in love. Now, you may have seen people love, you may have loved someone, but you've never really seen it in itself because it's not a physical thing you see. In the second debate I had with Christopher Hitchens, some student during the Q&A in the debate asked Christopher this question. Christopher, what is love? And Christopher, being a materialist, had to come up with a materialistic answer. So after he thought about it for a while, he said, love is a chemical. And I said, a chemical? Don't tell that to your wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Because I got the chemical today. Tomorrow I might not have it. Love is not a chemical. It's an immaterial reality grounded in the nature of God. It's a decision to seek what's best for the loved one. And by the way, that doesn't mean approving of everything the loved one wants to do. See, our culture thinks love means approval. Love does not mean approval. How many parents do we have in here? All right, how many former children do we have in here? Okay, that's all of us, right? Question. If your parent approved of everything you wanted to do as a child, would that parent be loving? No. You need to stand in the way of evil if you're going to love somebody. You can't approve of everything they want to do. That wouldn't be loving. That would be cowardly. And so many people say, oh, if you love me, you'll approve what I do. No, if I love you, I'll stand in the way of the evil you want to do for your own good. You've never seen gravity. Oh, Frank, no, there it is. There's gravity right there. No, you're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. We really don't even know what gravity is. Did you know that? By the way, this is how you should know. This is how you know God exists. If someone ever asks you, how do you know God exists? I think you should say this. I know God exists by his effects. For example, this creation is an effect, so you're reasoning back to a cause, a creator. You see design, that's an effect, you're reasoning back to a cause, a designer. You see a moral law written on your heart, that's an effect, you're reasoning back to a moral lawgiver. You have the ability to reason and ascertain truths outside your skull. Your mind, in other words, works, and you notice there are laws of logic out there and mathematics. That's the effect. You're reasoning back to a cause of mind. This is what scientists do, ladies and gentlemen. They find effects and they try and reason back to the cause. If the law of causality doesn't hold, we don't know anything from the past, and we don't know if God exists, and we can't do science. Why? Because science is built on cause and effect. So we're just trying to be as rational as we can. If we have effects, there must be a cause. What's the cause of a creation? What's the cause of cosmic design? What's the cause of an objective moral law? What's the cause of these laws of logic and mathematics and our ability to reason? The best cause, in my view, is a mind that put it all together and holds it all together. You've never seen George Washington, yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a cause known as George Washington. And you've never seen Jesus physically either, yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a cause called Jesus of Nazareth. Now, one last thing about miracles. If miracles do occur, you shouldn't see many of them. Well, first of all, let me say this. There doesn't have to be any miracles since Jesus and the apostles for Christianity to be true. There could have been no miracles for the past 2,000 years. Christianity would still be true. I think there have been, but even if there haven't been, you know what has to be true for atheism? For atheism to be true, every single miracle experience or miracle claim and spiritual experience in the history of the world has to be mistaken. Is that possible? Yeah, that's possible. Is that reasonable to believe? No. But think about miracles this way. Miracles have to be rare if they're going to get our attention. If miracles occurred all the time, we wouldn't call them miracles. We'd say, hey, this stuff happens all the time. No big deal. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred routinely. What would the resurrection of Christ mean? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. He died for your sins and rose again, and you will rise again if you put your trust in him. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Carl just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. No, it's got to be a rare event. It can't be a regular event. If it occurs all the time, it's a regular event. And we don't necessarily say this is an act of God. Although I will say this. Do you know there are things that occur every single day that are spectacular? And since they occur every day, we don't count them as miracles. And sometimes we don't even think about God. Well, let me ask you this. How many people in here have ever seen or have seen their own flesh and blood born? All moms, yes. Any dads in the room when it happened? Now, when you see your own flesh and blood come out of another human being, you don't go, evolution. You go, this is amazing. We did whoopee 9 months later. Look at this. How does this happen? You know that there's design behind it. You know there's intelligence behind it. Yet it happens every day, and we don't call it a miracle. In fact, one biologist put it this way. He said, God never did a miracle to convince an atheist because his ordinary works provide sufficient evidence. Just look around. The very fact you're conscious, if you're still with me right now, is a miracle, practically. How does this happen? All right, so miracles are possible. Now, the only question we have left is, has the ultimate miracle in the New Testament occurred? And that is the resurrection of Jesus. Now, I hardly ever do this on a college campus, but I'm going to spend the next 3 minutes talking about this because I know some people have had some difficulty trying to be confident that the New Testament hasn't been changed over the centuries. Now, for people that study this, I don't study this, I'm not a scholar in this world, but I know people who do study it, they know the question is settled. They know that we have what the original actually said. There are a few variants. We don't know. In fact, I'll show you what the conclusion is here. But the vast, vast majority of the New Testament, we know exactly what the original said. You say, how do we know that? Because we don't have the original document. We don't have the original manuscripts. They're lost to time. Most of them were written on papyrus. They didn't last very long. Okay? Although we do have some animal skins from the Dead Sea Scrolls, the oldest being the entire book of Isaiah from about 150 BC, which is amazing. But in any event, how do we know what the original said if we don't have the original? Well, here's how scholars determine what the original said. Let's say you have 4 manuscripts here, and the first copy has an error in the third word first, or the third word first letter. The second copy has an error in a different place. The third copy has an error in a still different place. The fourth copy has an error in another different place. Can you figure out what the original said? Yeah, you can figure out what the original said. You can figure out where the outliers are, where the variants are, and you can reconstruct the original with tremendous accuracy. And it depends on who you read on this, but the New Testament has been reconstructed to anywhere between 97 and 99.5% accuracy. And the very small percentage we don't know about, most of that has to do with word order and words that don't affect the meaning very much. Numbers, those kind of things. And none of them affect any theological belief, major theological belief that a Christian has. In fact, it's not that we have too little of the New Testament, we have too much of it. In other words, we've got passages we don't even know they should be in there, like the end of the Gospel of Mark. If you have a study Bible, you'll see that. Or the story of the woman caught in adultery. We don't know if that was in the original. It sounds like a true Jesus story, but we don't know if it was in the original. So we've got too much, not too little. And you say, well, Frank, I've heard, like, for example, Bart Ehrman, the great skeptic from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, he wrote a book called Misquoting Jesus, where he tried to show people that you really can't trust the New Testament. You got to pull the sheets back a little bit, ladies and gentlemen. Let me tell you what happened with that book. First of all, Bart Ehrman was a Christian growing up, and he ultimately went to Princeton to learn from the top manuscript scholar in the world. His name was Bruce Metzger. Bruce Metzger died about 15 or 20 years ago. It must be, well, probably about 15 years ago. And he was the top manuscript scholar in the world. And Metzger and Ehrman in 2005 wrote an academic book called The Text of the New Testament. They updated a previous work. And in that book, they said basically that you can trust the New Testament documents, that we have what the original actually said. But in that same year, Bart Ehrman wrote a popular level book called Misquoting Jesus. And when you read that book, you're alarmed. Wow, there are this many variants, and we don't know what the original said, he seems to be saying. And a lot of people got the wrong impression. So a couple of years later, he wrote a second edition of Misquoting Jesus. And on page 252, which is an addition in the second edition, an addition to the first edition. I'm using the wrong word here. You get the idea. There's something added in the second version. And here's what he says on page 252. This is Bart Ehrman, the skeptic. He says this. He says, Bruce Metzger is one of the great scholars of modern times, and I dedicated the book to him because he was both my inspiration for going into textual criticism and the person who trained me in the field. I have nothing but respect and admiration for him. And even though we may disagree on important religious questions, he's a firmly committed Christian and I am not. We are in complete agreement on a number of very important historical and textual questions. He says, if he and I were put in a room and asked to hammer out a consensus statement on what we think the original text of the New Testament probably looked like, there would be very few points of disagreement, maybe 1 or 2 dozen places out of many thousands. The position I argue for in misquoting Jesus does not actually stand at odds with Professor Metzger's position that the essential Christian beliefs are not affected by textual variants in the manuscript tradition of the New Testament. So you don't have to believe me. You can believe the top skeptic telling you the same thing, that we know what the original New Testament said, and any variants that we have do not affect the major beliefs of Christianity. Now, there's a lot more we could talk about, but we don't have time. What I want to show you now are some reasons why we can trust that the New Testament writers told the truth, right? It's one thing to say you got an accurate copy, right? It's another thing to say that the copies actually tell the truth. Because we could have a copy of a lie, right? Right? Do we have a copy of a lie? I don't think so. Here are 8 reasons, and we're not going to go through all 8 of them. 8 reasons why we know the New Testament writers told the truth. I'm just going to list them here and only talk about 3 of them. Early sources, eyewitness details, embarrassing stories, excruciating deaths, embedded confirmation, expected predictions, extra biblical writers, and the explosive growth of the church out of Jerusalem. Now, I can't explain these all now. You'll have to get the book if you want to go further. I just want to drill down on a few of them. First, I want to start with eyewitness details. And I'm going to read a short passage from a document in the New Testament. And I want you to tell me if this sounds like this writer's making up a story. All right? Here is what he puts in this text. I think they're historical crosshairs. He writes this: in the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar, when Pontius Pilate was governor of Judea, Herod, tetrarch of Galilee, his brother Philip, tetrarch of Iturea and Trachonitis, and Licinius, tetrarch of Abilene, during the high priesthood of Annas and Caiaphas, the word of God came to John, son of Zechariah, in the desert. All right, does it sound like this guy's making up a story? No, he's putting historical given an exact date, 29 AD. Why? That's the 15th year of the reign of Tiberius Caesar. He's saying that all 8 people here, these are real people, and they are known from history outside the Bible. Also, they are all known to live at this exact time. This is not a once upon a time story. It would be like if someone were today say, it's the 2nd year of the Biden administration. Kamala Harris is the vice president. Chuck Schumer and Mitch McConnell share power in the Senate. And Nancy Pelosi is the head of the House, and Ron DeSantis is the governor of Florida. Everybody would know when we're talking about, right? Those are historical crosshairs. And this is what's going on in Luke. He's not telling a once-upon-a-time story. In fact, Luke, the book of Acts, mentions 84 historically confirmed eyewitness details in it. Roman historian Colin Hemmer went through the entire book of Acts with a fine-tooth comb, and from chapter 13 to the end of the book, chapter 28, he picks out all these historical details that only an eyewitness or someone who knew an eyewitness would know. I mean, even obscure stuff like, who is the mayor in this obscure part of the Mediterranean Greek island or something? You know, he gets all that stuff right. How does he know that? In fact, this actually, we go on some Footsteps of Paul cruises. This is actually a picture of Corinth. And the reason I love Corinth is when you go to Corinth, there's no modern city built on top of it. You're standing right where the Apostle Paul stood. And there was an archaeologist about 100 years ago, his name was Sir William Ramsay, who thought that Luke was not a good historian. Then he went and traveled the Mediterranean for 20 years. And after he was done, he realized that Luke was an historian of first rank. Here's what he wrote. He said that after 20 years of research in the area, he found out that Luke references 32 countries, 54 cities, and 9 islands with no mistakes. Obviously using Google Earth, right? No, he didn't have any of that. And he went on to say that Luke is an historian of first rank. There are also 59 historical eyewitness details in other works like the Gospel. Well, the 59 come from the Gospel of John. Those are historically confirmed or historically probable eyewitness details in the Gospel of John. And then in writing this book, my co-author, Dr. Geisser, and I went and discovered more than 30 people confirmed by secular sources or archaeology that the Bible talks about. Here are just some of the names that you will find in the Bible and in archaeology or other writings from the time. The Agrippas, Bernice, Augustus, Caiaphas. I'll show you Caiaphas' discovery here in a minute. Felix, Gallio, all the Herods. The Bible gets all the Herods right. Imagine keeping all that bloodline straight. James, the half-brother of Jesus, mentioned by Josephus. So is John the Baptist. So is Jesus. I didn't even put him on the list. Jesus is mentioned by people outside. Pilate, Festus, Tiberius Caesar. All these people you read about in the New Testament are real people in history. They're not made up. In fact, let me show you how they know this. Here is what is called the Pilate Stone. This was discovered in the headquarters of the Romans, Caesarea Maritime, which is on the coast, northern Israel, right on the Mediterranean, beautiful place. They found this particular stone, Pontius Pilate, prefect of Judea, and this was discovered in 1961. One of the most fantastic discoveries ever discovered with regard to the New Testament is the Caiaphas ossuary. An ossuary is a burial box that the Jews used from about, say, 20 BC to 70 AD. What they would do is after somebody died, they would bury that individual, and about a year later, they'd go into the tomb, they'd take the bones out and put them in this limestone box known as an ossuary. And then they'd reinter the remains. Well, in 1990, they discovered this ossuary, which was very ornate. And on the side of it, they discovered it had an inscription which identified the remains as the remains of Caiaphas. Who's Caiaphas? Anyone know? He's the high priest that sentenced Jesus to die. You know, in the Gospel of Mark, when the high priest says, "Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One?" And Jesus says, "I am. And you will see the Son of Man coming with great power in the clouds." And Caiaphas, the high priest, tears his robe and says, "Blasphemy, you should die. What do you guys think? Yeah, he's guilty. Kill him." Isn't it interesting? Jesus claims to be God all over the New Testament. And the people who are standing before him agree he's claiming to be God, yet there are people today who say, no, he didn't claim to be God. Why did they kill him if he didn't claim to be God? Did he get killed for skipping around saying, love your neighbor? Does that get you killed? Love your neighbor. You must die. No, you get killed for claiming to be God. In any event, inside this box were the bones of a 60-year-old man and his family. This is not an invented story. There's only one Caiaphas known from history. Right next to the Caiaphas ossuary in the Israel Museum, where all these artifacts are, you will find the heel bone of a crucified victim. And there was an ossuary that this was in as well. Do you see that nail going through there? This is just a mock-up to show you the relative angle of the nail going through the heel bone. This comes from Jerusalem in the middle of the 1st century. So we know crucifixion was used. I mean, Josephus and others say crucifixion was carried out. But now we have physical evidence of it. Now, just 3 weeks ago, I was in Israel. We were leading a tour there. I don't know if you're going to be able to hear this because the volume's pretty low. I'll crank it up and see if you guys can hear it. But these 3 artifacts are right next to one another in the Israel Museum. You got this heel bone, you got the Pilate stone, and then you got the Caiaphas ossuary just sitting right there next to one another. Check this out. It's only less than a minute.
Priest at the time. You can see how ornate it is, how spectacular it is compared to the common man's ossuary. And we know this is Caiaphas' ossuary because it has an inscription on the side that identifies it as Joseph, son of Caiaphas.
And as I said, there were not only he was in there, but his family was in there. This is an amazing find. Now, if you want more on archaeology, I highly recommend you get this book by Titus Kennedy, Unearthing the Bible, 101 Archaeological Discoveries that Bring the Bible to Life. He's an archaeologist himself, been on many digs, and there's a lot more than what we could talk about here, but check out that book by Titus Kennedy. All right, let's do Embarrassing stories. We know we got eyewitness details. What about embarrassing stories? What are embarrassing stories? Embarrassing stories go like this. Historians know that if there's something embarrassing to the author or authors, it's probably true. Why would it be true? Because you're not going to invent details that embarrass you, right? You might invent things that make you look good, but you won't invent things that make you look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. And it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people have ever lied to make yourself look bad? No, you don't do that. You might lie to make yourself look good. You won't lie to make yourself look bad. You won't lie to embarrass yourself. Well, the New Testament is filled with embarrassing stories they never would have invented. By the way, so is the Old Testament. We don't have time to look at the New Testament. They're not making this up. That's why we call this the dove factor. I mean, think about this. Let me just give you a few of these. Notice, the leader of the disciples is a man named Peter. And at one point, Jesus turns to him and says, "Get behind me, Satan." Do you think they made this up? Do you think Mark, who wrote this down, at one point said to Peter, "Hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan." What do you think Peter would have said? "Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. This doesn't look good." And then at the crucifixion, well, about when we're coming up to the crucifixion, Peter says, "Lord, I'll never deny you." What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, maybe with the exception of John, they all run away as cowards. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away, right? They all run away. Now, who are the brave ones? Ladies, who are the brave ones? The women are the brave ones, right? The women go down to the empty tomb and the men don't. Why would they do that? Now, who wrote the New Testament down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? No, if I was there and inventing it, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd write down something like this. Let's say we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds good. John said, "Get out." Philip roundhouse kicked him. Thomas said, "We'll be back." No doubt. Then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Regardless of the fact it was embarrassing to men, it was, but for what other reason would you never say that? Yes, because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're trying to get people to accept your story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. But all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were. In fact, one of the women witnesses was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Oh, gee, what a great witness. In fact, I had a lady come up to me once. She said, "Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first." I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because he wanted to get the story out." I said, "That is an excellent point. I hadn't thought of that." Because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, "Hey, hon, what happened?" "Oh, yeah, forgot to tell you. The nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner?" He's not going to tell you. I can't even believe this next verse is in the Bible, but it is. This is Matthew 28. You know, Matthew 28, this is the climax of the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus takes his disciples up on the mountain in Galilee, and he gives them the Great Commission, where he says, "Go, therefore, make disciples of all nations." Notice he doesn't say make believers. Make disciples. Anyway, as he's standing there giving them the Great Commission, it says right there in verse 17 about his disciples, it says, "Some believed, but some doubted." What? He's standing resurrected right in front of them, and they're doubting. Is that embarrassing or what? It's like they're standing there going, "You see that guy over there? Yeah. That guy over there is Jesus. No, I'm telling you, Jesus is dead. The Romans killed him. It's him. It can't be. They just killed him not long ago. I'm telling you, that's Jesus. Look, the Romans know how to kill people. They whipped him. They nailed him to a cross. They put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. If they didn't kill him, they would have been killed themselves. Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus. His own brothers don't believe in him. That's embarrassing. His family in Mark chapter 3 wants to seize him and take him away because they think he's out of his mind. That's what the text says. You may have heard the scholars say that the New Testament writers invented Jesus to be God. Oh, really? Then why is Mark chapter 3 in there, which is very embarrassing? And it's almost universally recognized that Mark is the earliest gospel. And here it's saying that his family thinks he's nuts. He's called a drunkard. He's called a madman. He's called demon-possessed. You think they made that up? He has his feet wiped with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. Oh, by the way, notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar, who plays the prostitute, right? Now, do you think when Matthew and Luke were writing down the genealogies, they said, you know what, we really need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let's put a couple of prostitutes in there. What do you say, Rahab, Tamar? No! In fact, there's a lot of shady people in the bloodline of the Jewish Messiah. Who? Judah, from where we get the term Jew. Jesus, from the tribe of Judah. Judah, not a good guy. In fact, Judah's the guy that sold Joseph into slavery. Sold his own brother into slavery. Yet he's in the bloodline of the Messiah. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then, huh? Bathsheba's in there. In fact, when Matthew gets to her in the genealogy, he won't mention her name. What does he say instead? Uriah's wife. Ooh. Who's Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed so he could have Bathsheba. Matthew's telling the truth, but it's a slam. You notice that? Why would you say that if you're making this up? And then Jesus is hung on a tree. If you're making up a Messiah to the Jews, you don't hang him on a tree. Why not? Because according to Deuteronomy 21:23, anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. Well, Jesus was under God's curse. What curse? The curse of sin. We put him under. If you were making this up, you wouldn't say that, though. Think about this, ladies and gentlemen. What are the two trees in Genesis? Tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Then fast forward all the way to Revelation. What do you find in Revelation? The tree of life. You know there's a tree right in the middle. What's the tree in the middle? The tree Jesus was hung on. Because we sinned at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Jesus had to be hung on a tree to take the curse of our sin so we could get back to the tree of life. If he hadn't taken our sin, we couldn't see eternal life because the infinitely just God would have to punish us. But if you're making this up, you wouldn't say that. There's much more embarrassing details, or many more embarrassing details in the text. Let's just do one more, and that is excruciating deaths. And this is the argument that says these men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had resurrected from the dead died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying, look, it never happened. Now, in order to get the gravity of this, we all need to realize that the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, the writers of the New Testament were all believers in Yahweh. They were Jewish. They were God's chosen people. And they didn't believe two things that the Christian story tells. They didn't think a man could claim to be God. They thought that was blasphemy. And they didn't think someone would rise from the dead in the middle of time. They knew we'd all rise from the dead at the end of time, according to Daniel 12. But they didn't think there would be one single individual resurrecting in the middle of time. So what would have caused these pious Jews who thought they were God's chosen people to now suddenly believe those things? In fact, take a look at the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection. Before the resurrection, they believed in animal sacrifice. They've been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years. Jesus shows up and they go, you know, we don't need to slay these lambs anymore because these lambs are just symbols of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Here he is. Before, they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, Christ's life has fulfilled the binding law of Moses. Before, they believed in strict monotheism. Afterwards, they're believing in a Trinity, 3 persons in one divine essence. Yes, you can get the Trinity in the Old Testament, but it's much clearer in the New. Before, they believed in the Sabbath. In fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. Afterwards, they're worshiping on Sunday, and Paul even says in Colossians 2, don't let anyone tell you have to obey any Sabbath or festival day. Why? Because what did the Sabbath represent? The Sabbath represented rest. Who is our rest? Jesus is our rest. We rest in him. He does all the work. By the way, when they worshiped on Sunday, it wasn't to replace the Sabbath. Why did they worship on Sunday? Because that's the day he rose. In fact, out of the 10 commandments, 9 of them are repeated in the New Testament. There's only one that isn't. Which one? Keep holy the Sabbath. The Sabbath has arrived. Before, they believed in a conquering Messiah, afterwards a sacrificial Messiah. Before, they believed in circumcision, afterwards they believed in baptism and communion. Now, ladies and gentlemen, what would have caused these pious Jews who thought they were God's chosen people for 2,000 years, what would have caused them to abandon all of these beliefs and adopt all these new beliefs virtually overnight under the threat of death? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? An impact event is an event that occurs in your life that is so dramatic, so impactful, that it can turn your attitude around 180 degrees overnight. Some impact events are so dramatic, while you won't remember what you had for breakfast this morning, you'll remember an impact event that happened 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago if you're old enough. In fact, there's only maybe, I don't even know if there's anybody in this room that can answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you can remember where you were November 22nd, 1963, raise your hand. Can anyone in here remember? Okay, hold your hands up. See these few people in here with their hands up? These people are very old. November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old in 2 days. Yes, I'm 60 years old now. I know, I don't look a day over 59. In fact, when I turned 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. Anyway, November 22nd, 1963, I'm a toddler. I'm standing in our home in Wanamassett, New Jersey. My mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? They killed the president. They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. I can still see my mother in my mind right now when she was 26 years old, sitting on that ottoman. She's 84 today. But I can see her when she was 26. That's my earliest memory. I don't remember anything before that and very little after that. Where were you when the second plane hit the tower? Those you are old enough? I was in my office where I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. I had the TV on behind me, and I had seen the tower the first tower had been hit. I didn't know by what, and I was talking to a pastor on the north side of Charlotte, and we were talking about what I would do to come to his church, what topic I'd talk about. And I said, you got the TV on? He goes, yeah. I said, maybe a Cessna hit the World Trade Tower. We're just talking, my back's to the TV. Suddenly he yells into the phone. He goes, the second tower just got hit. I turned around, look at the TV. The second tower's on fire. I said, what is it, a Cessna? He goes, no. It was like a United plane. It's a passenger plane. I said, you just saw that? He goes, it just flew in there on live TV. I said, look, let me call you back. I hung up the phone. For some reason that morning I had CNN on, the communist news network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said this: one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. I said, navigational error? You doofus. This is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. What do you think? Pilots can't see where they're going? You think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? I mean, come on. This is terrorism. I called the pastor the next day. I said, we're going to come to your church and talk about Islam because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11 was 21 years ago. And those who are old enough can remember something about that day. But if I were to ask you what you were doing 21 days ago, for some of you 21 minutes ago, most of you would go, I don't know, let me look at my iPhone. What was I doing that day? Why can you remember something from 21 years ago but not something from 21 days ago? No impact event 21 days ago. Impact event 21 years ago. Do you think if Jesus really rose from the dead, that would have been an impact event? Do you think they would have remembered everything he said and everything he did after they saw him? Would they have any trouble remembering that and writing it down? No, that's the only way I could imagine why they would have abandoned everything on the left and adopted everything on the right virtually overnight, especially under the threat of death. In fact, think about this, ladies and gentlemen. What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did they get for saying Jesus resurrected from the dead? Well, they got kicked out of the synagogue, and then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. We're going to start a new religion. We are? Yeah. What's it going to get us? First, we get kicked out of the synagogue, then beaten, tortured, and killed. Well, sign me up. What a great idea. Why haven't we thought of this before? No, I don't think so. In fact, they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. I get this question, maybe you get this question. Are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yeah, there are. They're in chapter 9 of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. But there weren't eyewitnesses, yet if you add up what they say about Jesus and the apostles, you get a story congruent with the New Testament. However, when people ask you for secular sources, I often think there's an illicit assumption when they do that. You know what the illicit assumption is? You really can't trust the New Testament writers because they were religious people. They tend to embellish things. You can only trust the secular sources to figure out what happened. If you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you realize how stupid that is. Why? What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? Nothing. They lost everything. They had no motive to invent it. Some of you may know my friend J. Warner Wallace. I don't know if you know Jim. He's a cold case homicide detective who's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective because he solves murders decades old. And Jim has used his detective skills to investigate the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. And that's the book Cold Case Christianity. If you're interested, it's a great book. Anyway, Jim says whenever he finds a dead body that he knows has been murdered, he says, there's only 3 reasons why that guy's dead, or a combination of these 3. I don't need to look for 100 motivations. It's one of these 3 reasons or a combination of the 3. That guy is dead because there was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, or power. Those are the 3 motivators that might cause somebody to murder. In fact, they're the same 3 motivators that might cause us to sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. The problem is they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. So Jim is saying, if you want to say the New Testament writers embellished all this, you got to find one of those 3 motivators. One or more of those 3 motivators. So let's take a look at the motivators. Ladies and gentlemen, did the New Testament writers get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite of power. They got persecuted. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, what happens? What does he do? He's the one persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. There's no motive to make this up. There's every motive to say it didn't happen, not every motive to say it did. And then why would they go die for a known lie? At this point, you might say, time out, Frank, wait a minute. Are you going to tell me that martyrdom shows Christianity's true? If that's the case, don't you have to say martyrdom shows Islam's true? No. Why? Because there's a lot of differences between the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times and the Muslim martyrs today. But let me give you one difference for our purposes here. The Muslim martyrs of today haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. They just have faith. But the New Testament martyrs of New Testament times witnessed Jesus rise from the dead. They saw Jesus. They touched Jesus. They ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Some people will die for a lie they think is the truth. Nobody will die for a lie they know is a lie. And the New Testament writers were in a position to know whether it was a lie or not, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. Actually, if I was there myself, I probably would have run away and not gotten the evidence. Tell you the truth. How do you think you would have done? All right, last thing. What I'm about to say is going to sound like heresy for those of you who believe the Bible's inerrant like I do. But it's not. Stick with me. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. You say, how can that be? Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Why? Because Christianity did not originate with a book. Christianity originated with an event, the resurrection. There would be no series of books we call the New Testament written by Jews in the first century claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead unless a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead. Why would they invent this? We've already been through this. They wouldn't. Christianity would be true if nobody ever knew about it because it's based on an historical event, not a book. Now, thankfully, they did write it down so we could know about it and then order our lives according to it, but it would have been true even if they had never written it down. Do you see the point? In fact, you could say it this way. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't have these documents written down by Jews in the first century, especially documents that would get these people beaten, tortured, and killed and thrown out of the synagogue prior to that, unless this really happened. Especially documents that go against what they believed as Jews. They're not making this up. So, there's a lot more in the books. Here are the 4 main points again. Does truth exist? If somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Does God exist? What are the 3 arguments? First argument, cosmological. Second, teleological. Third, moral. We get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent, moral creator who created and sustains all things. We haven't opened the Bible yet. Are miracles possible? Greatest miracle in the Bible? Genesis 1:1. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Is the New Testament telling us the truth about the resurrection? We just went through eyewitness details, and there's more in the book, embarrassing stories, and also excruciating deaths. All this data seems to point to the fact that, yes, this is really true. So here's how you can get the entire PowerPoint presentation. Text the word evidence to this phone number, 855-909-0582. 855-909-0582. If you're watching out there in internet land, you can do the same thing, all right? 855-909-0582. Text the word evidence. I'm going to send you the entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format. By the way, I showed you maybe 70 slides here. The entire presentation has 360 slides. So it goes through everything. So, and if you want to get the books are available out there. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. The DVD set is out there, which is a 7-hour DVD set that has workbooks you can get with it. Could be a good curriculum. Homeschool, small groups, high school. There may be 1 copy of Hollywood Heroes, How Your Favorite Movies Reveal God out there that my son and I wrote. And by the way, all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Just so you know. All right, so there's that phone number. We are also, by the way, teaching online courses where you can take online courses from us, and we do Zoom Q&As around those courses. We're on YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. In fact, we're so into YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook, we've actually combined these 3 into one social media platform. We call it YouTwitFace. It's kind of a Jersey thing. Have you signed up for YouTwitFace yet? Actually, we're on Instagram and TikTok too. Don't forget about the podcast, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, the TV show. And if you don't do anything else, download the free Cross-Examined app. 2 words in the App Store, Cross-Examined. It's going to have the TV show on it. It's going to have the podcast on it. And it even has a quick answer section on it. So you might be having lunch with somebody and they say something, they bring up some objection to Christianity. You're not quite sure how to answer it. All you need to do is take out your iPhone or your Droid and go, hey, hang on, I'm getting a text. Hey, what about this? It's right there on your phone. All right? All right, it's true. So what? Well, the so what is this, ladies and gentlemen? That someone actually did die for you. Jesus of Nazareth. And there's nothing you can do to earn your salvation. It's free. Forgiveness is free. Grace is free. That's what grace is. Now, many years ago when I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation, and we had to earn golden wings, which were fairly hard to earn. But there's nothing more difficult in the Navy, maybe nothing more difficult in any military to earn than a golden trident. That's what the SEALs wear. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through, maybe 5 or 10%. Those that do make it through wear that trident with pride. It is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery just outside of San Diego, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and they pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that sacrificed for them, the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to put our identity in our Savior, the one that died for us, the one that sacrificed for us. But our culture says, oh, no, don't do that. Put your identity in your political party, or put your identity in your sexual orientation, or put your identity in your boyfriend, or your girlfriend, or your bank account, or your vocation, or your gender identity, whatever that means. Do you realize, ladies and gentlemen, that none of those things are ultimate? That you can lose everything in this life. You can lose your health, your spouse, your job, your life. The only thing you can't ever lose is Jesus. He's your creator and your savior. That's who you put your identity in. Everything else is going to come up short. It's not going to work. And this Savior didn't just die, he also rose from the dead to show that he is God and to also show that you will be resurrected from the dead someday as well when you put your trust in him. Have you put your trust in him? If you haven't, why wouldn't you? It's free. All right. We're going to go to questions. Before we do, I want Matthew to come up here, and what we're doing here is what we call apologetics, and Matthew and the Ratio Christi team do it on this campus every week, and he is going to tell you where you can join and how you can join, or if you just want to show up and learn a little bit more about it. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, awesome. Hey, thank you so much, Dr. Turek. Hey, yeah, I just want to explain real quick about Ratio Christi. First of all, before I do that, I just want to thank, once again, just each and every one of our sponsors. I'm so thankful for every club, every organization, every church that has allowed this event to take place. So thank you so much. Some of you have worked so hard for this to come to pass, and so thank you once again. Yeah, Ratio Christi is Latin for the reason for Christ, or even like rational Christianity. Our goal is twofold. Our first goal is to help Christian students or believers know why they believe what they believe and be able to defend their faith, right? On college campuses, it's so easy. You know, we come to campus and we have these different classes that we encounter so many different worldviews and different ways of thinking, maybe for the first time, right? And so we don't know how to defend our faith. Ratio Christi wants to help students and equip students to know how to defend their faith using things like philosophical answers, historical reasons and arguments, and scientific arguments for the truth claims of Christianity. Secondly, we want to help skeptics, right? If you're skeptical about the truth claims of Christianity and the truth claims of theism, we invite you to have conversation with us, have debate with us. We are so willing to defend our claims. And so if that's something you are interested in, we are an official USA club here on campus. That is an official Utah State University club here on campus. We actually have a table out in the lobby. There's some amazing organizations as well that have tables, so I encourage you to check them out. But if you want to, we meet weekly, every single week. We meet on Thursdays at 6:30. Once again, I invite you to our table. My friend Nick, I think Nick's here somewhere. There's Nick. Nick is going to be at the table as well. If you want to sign up for Ratio Christi, we'd love to email you and get you plugged into the club and organization itself. So, hey, thank you so much. I'd love to see you in Ratio Christi Thursday nights at 6:30 in the Hyper building, Hyper 118. The Hyper building is right across from the Taggart Student Center, the TSC. Hyper 118 at 6:30 on Thursday nights. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. By the way, ladies and gentlemen, do you know what the word Matthew means? The name means gift from God. There he is, right there. That's what it means. All right, since no one likes to ask the first question, we're moving right on to the second question. Second question right here, ladies and gentlemen, so the people in internet land can hear your question. And once the first person starts, then other people will come down. So we just need one brave person to come down, ask a question, and then everyone will line up behind them. So just somebody ask the first question. Come on down, sir. Yeah, just come right on down. And while we're waiting, so one atom said to another atom, I just lost an electron. And the second said to the first, are you sure? And the first said, I'm positive. That's my science dad joke right there. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hi, my name is Devin.
Hey, Devin.
Thank you for this presentation.
Yes, sir.
So you were talking a bit about how pervasive relativism is in our education system and in our culture at large. My question is, like, as Christians, what is our responsibility, if any, in responding to that in our culture?
Well, I think we have to ask people questions, because asking questions is less offensive than making statements. So when someone says, well, all truth is relative, you're going to ask them, well, is that a relative truth? If someone says there is no truth, are you sure that's true? If someone says it's true for you but not for me, you're going to say, is that true for everybody? You're going to have a conversation with them, in other words, to get them to realize that when that relativists have, they stand on the pinnacle of their own absolute and they relativize everything else. So you just want to point out that everybody's making truth claims. The only question is which claim or what claims are actually true. So I think you can do that by asking questions and get people to think a little bit.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Devin. Appreciate it. Hey, how you doing?
Good.
What's your name?
Skylee Montgomery.
Say again?
Skylee Montgomery.
Skyler Montgomery. How are you?
Skylee.
Say again?
Skylee.
Skylee. Got it. And who's your friend?
Harmony Hatch.
Hey, Harmony. How are you? All right, go ahead, Skylee.
What is the difference between the Christian God and the Mormon God?
Wow, what a great question. And I think we're about out of time. Well, the Christian God is infinite, meaning he has always existed, and every attribute he has is limitless. So he's infinite love, infinite justice, infinite righteousness. He has all these qualities. And he is the uncreated creator. A lot of times people will ask, who made God? Well, the answer is no one made God, because he's the unmade maker. He's the uncreated creator. And if you think about it this way, if space, matter, and time had a beginning, and they did, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. Now, if you're timeless, do you have a beginning? No. You don't have a beginning. You're the uncreated creator, the unmoved mover. So the God of the Bible is the unmoved mover, the uncreated creator. He is the ground of all being. Now, as I understand the Latter-day Saints position, the God, and if anyone here is Latter-day Saint and thinks that what I'm saying is wrong, you're welcome to come up and correct me. But the God of this world was once a man. And there's an eternal progression back of gods, men who become gods. Because as God is today, or as man is, God once was. So God of this world was once a man. And as a faithful LDS man, you can one day become a god and get your own planet. Okay? So there are many gods in Mormonism. Mormonism is polytheistic, whereas Christianity is monotheistic, Trinitarian monotheism, okay? And as I mentioned earlier, the Mormon view is an eternal progression. That doesn't appear to be possible. You can't go on an eternal progression, or eternal regression, I should say, of one God after another. There has to be a starting point to get to where we are now. In fact, let me show a visual representation of this, which may be helpful. This is actually an argument for the fact that the universe itself had to have a beginning. Let's take a look at this visual right here. Here is a timeline right here, okay? Let's say we don't know when this timeline began. Here's the present right here. There's yesterday, there's the day before yesterday, and there's last week, okay? Here's my question. Can this timeline be infinite into the past? Yes. How? If there were an infinite number of days before this day right here, would this day have gotten here? You can't traverse an infinite number of days. There can only be a finite number of days before today for today to have gotten here. So this shows that time had to have a beginning, otherwise today never would have arrived. So if time had a beginning, whatever created time must be timeless. The same thing is true. If you had an infinite number of gods before today, you would never get to this God of this universe. There had to be a beginning somewhere. Now, I've had conversations with LDS people about this before. I've gone through the cosmological argument and pointed out that there has to be a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent creator. And the answer I got back was, well, we don't go back that far. That we don't investigate. That's deep theology. We don't go back that far. So I'm saying logically, that doesn't appear to be correct. There has to be a beginning. And when it comes to time, if the past were infinite, today never would have arrived. But today's here, so there must have been a beginning. Now, that's the difference in the qualities, the metaphysical qualities of God, but there are other differences as well. We, of course, as historical Christians, believe that Jesus is the second person of the Trinity. He was not the spirit brother of Lucifer. And He is the Savior. And by putting our trust in Him, we are granted eternal life. Not by any works we've done, but by the work He's done for us. And then once we accept that, we're not only forgiven, but we're given His righteousness. So that's what we believe. That's what historical Christianity has always believed.
Thank you.
All right, good questions. Thank you. Don't the kids always ask the questions nobody wants to ask? Isn't that great? Yes, sir. What's your name?
I got you. Testing, testing.
There you go.
Is that working? Okay. I was just going to ask you, so...
What's your name?
I'm Isaac.
Isaac, get a little closer to the mic if you could. Yeah, go ahead.
That work? Okay.
I think so.
I was just going to ask you, obviously you've got, you're well into your, the legacy you built for your life.
Do I look that old, Isaac?
Well, I'm just saying, you have a lot of accomplishments under your belt, a lot of stuff that you've been able to build. What stemmed that? Or was there a certain point or a gradual transformation that happened in you that made you want to go and do this? And what did that feel like for you?
How did I get into doing this? Yeah. When I was in the Navy, first of all, I was brought up Roman Catholic because I'm from New Jersey and it's the law. Okay? And when I went off to college, I always believed in God, but I didn't know who Jesus was. After college, I went into the Navy, went to navigator school, flight school. I met the son of a Methodist minister, and I had so many questions for this guy. He finally said, look, you just need to get Josh McDowell books, Evidence Demands a Verdict and More Than a Carpenter. So I read those apologetics books, and I said, wow, Christianity appears to be true. When I got out of the Navy, several years later, I ran into a man by the name of Norman Geisler, who was at the time the Tom Brady, maybe not a good example now, he was the Steph Curry of apologetics, all right? He had started a seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I and my family moved there in 1993, and then I began to work with him, and I was mentored by him, and he and I wrote a couple of books. One's called Legislating Morality, the other's called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. So A little bit later, in 2006, I started a ministry called crossexamine.org to go to college campuses, because 75% of kids that go to college campuses who start as Christians leave the church at college.
And that just kind of saddened you, or
well, I
guess
wanted
what?
to try and bring the truth of Christianity to the college campus and answer any questions I possibly could answer. That's why.
That's cool.
So there are some other people that do this. William Lane Craig, as you might know, goes to colleges quite a bit. So does my friend Rice Brooks. So does my friend Charlie Kirk. So there are people out there who are going to college campuses to bring the truth to the college campus, but not many of us, unfortunately. So we're trying to look for other people to do it as well.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Isaac. Good question. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Oh, sorry.
That's all right.
Hi, I'm Angel.
Yes. Hey, Angel.
And I just want to say hi. I've been watching you for a while, and I'm so excited you're here.
Oh, thank you.
But I think my question
Alpine
is...
Church, right down the road.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it coming in.
Yeah.
Hey, how you guys doing?
It's great.
All right.
But I think my question is that here being in the state of Utah, which, you know, has a lot of, like, LDS and
Right,
stuff.
sure.
I think that it's kind of been drilled in that the Bible just has so many different translations, and that it's all about interpretation. When I've spoken to like some family members and things like that about it, I guess my question is like, how would you bring up the truth about the interpretations? So like if I bring up a verse about the Trinity, it's again all about how you interpret it. So
I would say that person, so you're saying it's not about how I interpret it. And what's that person going to say? No, it is about how you interpret it. Well, the way I'm interpreting you is it's not about how I interpret it. Why is it that we interpret the Bible, it's relative and it can be whatever you want it to be, but when we interpret the person saying that it's all about interpretation, they don't allow us to interpret what they say any way we want. You notice that? In other words, they want us to take their words at face value, but when we come to the Bible, we don't have to take the Bible at face value or the proper way it is interpreted. Okay, so I would point out that whatever they say, they expect us to take in the way they intended it, but when it comes to the Bible, there can be a lot more mushiness in there, and I think that's just illegitimate. That's not the case. But I will say, they are right. There are some passages that are difficult to interpret. And we have a course that we run online called How to Interpret Your Bible. Let me give you the guts of the course in 1 minute. Whenever I come to a passage, I'm going to stop. And what does stop mean? Stop is an acronym, S-T-O-P. The first thing I need to know is the situation. What's going on in this passage? Who is this passage written to? What's it about? What's the situation on the ground, right? I want to know what the situation is because I want to understand why the writer was writing this. The T stands for what type of literature? Is this law? Is this poetry? Is this prophecy? Is this parable? What is this? Because it's going to, you're going to interpret differently poetry than you would say law or history, right? The O stands for who's the object of the passage. Is this written to us? Or is this written to, say, the exiles who went to Babylon in 586 BC? And ladies and gentlemen, no extra charge for this. This is why Jeremiah 29:11 does not apply to you. You guys know Jeremiah 29:11? Oh, the plans I have for you, plans for to prosper you, plans to have a future. Who's that written to? Is that written to 21st century Christians? No, that's written to the exiles who went to Babylon in 586 BC. Unless you're 2,600 years old living under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar in Iraq, this passage is not a passage for you. It's not a promise for you. I always ask people that interpret Jeremiah 29:11 as if it's a promise to them. I say, why don't you take the promise from Jeremiah 44:11 and apply it to you? Why? What's Jeremiah 44:11? Jeremiah 44:11 is what God said he would do to the exiles that went to Egypt. And God said, don't go to Egypt. So you know what Jeremiah 44:11 says? It doesn't say, I will prosper you. It says, I will destroy you and all Judah. You don't see that stitched into a pillow. Right? You don't see that on a birthday card. Happy birthday. I will destroy you and all Judah. Jeremiah 44:11. That is so sweet. Thank you, Grandma. You know, you don't see that. Why? Because people are taking stuff out of context and applying it any way they want. So that's the O. Who's the object of the passage? And the P is this prescriptive or descriptive? Do you know that Solomon had 800 wives and so many porcupines? Or I can't remember. He had, and people will go, see, the Bible condones polygamy. No, it doesn't condone it. It's not prescribing it, it's describing it. The Bible describes that David actually committed adultery with Bathsheba, but it's not a prescription for us, it's a description. So there's a lot of descriptions in the Bible that aren't prescriptions. So I think generally, if you figure out the situation, the type of literature, who's the object of the passage, and is it prescriptive or descriptive, 95% of the time you're going to know exactly what it means. And the main things are the plain things. We know we're saved by Christ through grace. In fact, let me just say a few things that the Bible tells us. There is a God and you are not Him, right? We've all sinned. We all need a Savior. Jesus is the Savior. By trusting in Him, you will be saved, and you should tell that to other people. That's the essential story of the Scriptures. Of course, there's a lot more to it. Now, that's clear. Yet I see people trying to make it unclear. And it shouldn't be. All right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angel. Good question. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
Hi.
Hey.
Okay, perfect.
What's your name?
My name's Roger. Nice to
Roger
meet
from
you.
last night.
Yes.
All the way from Seattle.
Sorry. 12 hours, figured another couple hours wouldn't make a difference anyway. But anyway.
Thanks, Roger. He was down at the other university last night. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I'm back, no doubts. And I did take off my second mask so that this would come off a little bit more clear,
All
so
right.
I hope the voice is coming through. So the question that I had for you kind of ties into Revelation chapter 22, verses 18 to 19. I'm just going to read it really quick. I don't think I need to read it to you, obviously, but
Okay.
just to
No,
establish. It says, "For I testify unto every man that heareth the words of the prophecy of this book, if any man shall add unto these things, God shall add unto him the plagues that are written in this book. And if any man shall take away from the words of the book of this prophecy, God shall take away his part out of the book of life and out of the holy city and from the things which are written in this book." So the question for you is, so in your opinion, what's the best way to gracefully witness to individuals whose core faith doctrines rely on more than the 66 books of the Bible?
Well, that warning is pretty stark, isn't it?
Right.
You might suggest to them that that particular passage is there. You might also suggest that Jesus said this to the Bible followers of his day: you nullify the Word of God on account of your tradition. How often do we do that? How many traditions do we have that aren't really biblical, that even cause churches to split?
Right.
We need to focus in on the essentials, and we need to point out that traditions, wherever they come from, are not to be followed at the expense of what the Word of God says.
Right.
And as you know, in Christendom, there have been many traditions that have arisen that are not biblical.
Right.
And so I think we just need to stick to the Scriptures. Now, there are denominations that will say, well, we don't just rely on the Scriptures. For example, the Roman Catholic denomination will say that we also rely on church fathers and what they say. The problem with that view, in my view anyway, is that the church fathers don't always agree with one another.
Right.
So which church father are you going to follow? And what happens if the church father disagrees with the Scripture?
Right.
It seems to me the Scripture is the authority, not church father, not popes, not tradition, not apostles or prophets that have come along later. The apostles and prophets that were confirmed by miracles were confirmed in the first century. And an apostle meant a sent one. And in the first century, to be an apostle, you had to be an eyewitness of the resurrection, which means you had to live in the first century.
Right.
So I do not think there are apostles today. I think that they've already been confirmed, and the revelation that we have is sufficient. In fact, I think the revelation we have is more than adequate because I can't keep up with it. Can you?
No.
Whenever I think of us looking at God saying, God, I need more truth, I imagine him looking down at us and saying, how are you doing with the old truth? Not so good, Lord. Well, once you get that down, maybe I'll send you more. We have enough that we can't keep up with. We don't need more.
Got it. Thank you very
All
much.
right, thank
Appreciate
you, Roger.
it.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
Owen.
Owen, go ahead, sir.
So I was just wondering what your take on, so some segments of Christianity and also the LDS Church. I'm not LDS, by the way, but I'm not LDS. I'm not. I'm Alpine, but some segments of Christianity and also LDS Church believes that water baptism is essential for salvation. I just want to know what your take on that is.
Yeah, good question. And that typically comes from Acts chapter 2, verse 36 to 38, somewhere there, repent and be baptized, every one of you, for the remission of sins, right? But if you keep reading in Acts, there are other times when people get saved and they don't get baptized. I think the easiest way to show that water baptism is not essential for salvation, that it is rather a sign of salvation, is to go to Romans 1 and 1 Corinthians 1. What does Paul say in 1 Corinthians 1? In 1 Corinthians 1, there's an argument. Who are you following? You following Apollos? You following Paul? Who are you following? And Paul says, look, I did not come to baptize. I came to preach the gospel. I don't care if you're baptized under Apollo or me or anybody else. I came to preach the gospel. And then he says in Romans 1 that the gospel saves. So notice in 1 Corinthians 1, he's bifurcating. In other words, he's separating the gospel and baptism. He said, I didn't come to baptize, I came to preach the gospel. And in Romans 1, he says, it's the gospel that saves. So that means that baptism's not part of the gospel. So it's not necessary for salvation. Now, it's a step of obedience. We should get baptized, but it's not a requirement for baptism. Obviously, the thief on the cross was not baptized, and yet he was saved.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
All right, thanks, Owen. Appreciate it. Hey, what's your name?
I'm Eleanor.
Hey, Eleanor, go ahead.
Why do you think that not so many college kids come out as Christians?
Well, there's a number of reasons. I was a college kid. I didn't come out as a Christian. When you go to college, there's a number of factors that conspire against you maintaining your Christian faith. Number one, you're out on your own for the first time probably, and you don't want to do everything the Bible tells you you ought to be doing morally. You want to fit in. You want to hang out with your friends, and you might want to do certain things that God doesn't want you to do. So there's a moral hazard there. What we mean by that is you have an incentive to walk away from the faith, a moral incentive. And then secondly, when you're out on your own and you're trying to make it in college, you might say, I don't really need to go to church. I've done that for years. I've got too much to do. There's too many fun things to do here at college, so you get separated from other Christians. Thirdly, when you come to most colleges, you're going to get a presentation that typically is not neutral toward Christianity. It's hostile to Christianity. I'm not saying this is true here at this university, but statistics nationwide say that college professors are 5 times more likely to be atheists than the general public. And there are very few Christian college professors because college professors are self-selecting. They tend to select only people that agree with them, and they're decidedly left of center theologically and politically. So you're not going to get many college professors who are going to give you any of the evidence we've given here. They're going to give you ideas that are counter to what we've talked about here. So there's a number of reasons. Does that make sense? Thank you, Eleanor. By the way, I've been asked, my kids are beyond college age now. They're in their 30s. They're married. Would I send my kids to college now? Probably not, unless they wanted to be an attorney, a doctor, a military officer, or an engineer. Because unless I might send them to certain schools that I could trust, maybe Hillsdale or Liberty or something like that. My friend Charlie Kirk just wrote a book called The College Scam. And if you have a desire to work hard, you can actually get an education without ever going to college, and you can make yourself a good living without ever going to college. I'm not saying don't go to college. I'm just saying I'm much more hesitant now if I had kids that age, because it's getting more and more hostile. It's getting more and more crazy on many college campuses. And I don't want to sacrifice my kids on the altar of a diploma. One they probably, do you know that more than half
of employers say that the kids that they hire from college aren't ready to do the job. They're not prepared. And 41% of people that go to college don't graduate. And about the same percentage are working in jobs that have nothing to do with their major, and they're not even required to have a bachelor's degree to do the job. So one reason that college is so expensive is because in 2010, the government decided they were going to take student loans out of the hands of the banks and that they would distribute the student loans. And they made money so plentiful that college tuition could keep going up. Why? Because there's an endless supply of money. Colleges don't have to cut back on tuition. They can keep charging you more and more because they know you can get the money. And so there are many kids coming out of college with a bachelor's degree and $250,000 worth of debt that they'll never get out of. Just something to think about. And here we are at college.
Thanks
Yes,
for
ma'am.
that
What's your
depressing
name?
thought. Just kidding.
Yeah, what's your name?
I'm Anna.
Hey, Anna.
So
Go
this
ahead.
is like a different type of question. I know Ken Ham with Answers in Genesis believes in speciation versus evolution. Like I know being a college student shooting for a bachelor's, I've taken biology courses, and there's evidence towards evolution. And I'm assuming you don't specifically believe in evolution, but do you believe in speciation?
What do you mean by speciation?
There were different species, like a dog, a cat, a bird, like in creation, but then they've all evolved from there into like finches, eagles, penguins.
Yeah,
like that's
you're talking
speciation.
about microevolution.
Yes, yeah.
Yes, that microevolution has been observed.
Okay.
But the idea that macroevolution, that you could go from, say, a reptile to a bird, has never been observed. And in fact, there's evidence against it.
But dinosaurs, just kidding.
Well,
soft spot in my childhood,
okay,
sorry.
Well, yeah. But dinosaurs, I think, were created directly. I don't think that dinosaurs came from some other creature. You know, evolutionists believe, really, that they don't know how the first life came into existence, but all life is related ancestrally to the first life in some way. They can't demonstrate this. This is just an article of faith for them. And even now, Darwinists are starting to realize their theory doesn't work, and that's why in 2016 the Royal Society over there in London, an august scientific affiliation that was really partially founded, or at least one of their initial members was Isaac Newton, they all got together about six years ago and said, we need a new theory of evolution because this idea of descent with modification by mutating DNA doesn't work. And they admitted it all, but they still haven't come up with a new theory because intelligence is involved. In fact, DNA itself is a product of intelligence. It's a software program, and programs come from programmers. They come from minds. So I think there's evidence for microevolution, but I think there's evidence against the idea that microevolution could ultimately turn into macroevolution. Can I show you one slide on that? Why I think that is, well, I guess this is the easiest way of showing you what Darwinism found. This is what Darwin found, okay? Darwin found that the beak depth of finches on the Galapagos Islands varied with the weather. That's basically what he found. He said in certain weather conditions it was more advantageous to have a bigger beak, and in other weather conditions it was more advantageous to have a smaller beak. So the bigger beak finches survived in the drier weather, and the smaller beak finches survived better in the wetter weather. What did he discover? Did he discover the origin of finches? No, all he discovered was that the proportion of bigger beak to smaller beak finches changed with the weather. Big deal. You start with finches and you end with finches, but the origin of finches is never explained. In fact, here's a phrase that I think makes sense. Natural selection can help explain the survival of a species, but not the arrival of a species. Where did finches come from to begin with is the question. Where did they come from to begin with? Now, go back to this for a second. Notice that the beak depth varied with the weather. It didn't go directional. In other words, these beaks didn't get bigger and bigger until you had pelicans, right? There's a small range in which they varied. So I think microevolution can explain this, but it can't explain the origin of finches itself. or themselves.
Sweet. Thank you.
All right, thanks. Good question. Yes, sir.
Hello, thank you.
Hey, what's your name?
Thomas.
Thomas, go ahead, sir.
As an evangelical, I go out in Cache Valley and other places, and I share the gospel with people, kind of cold evangelism on the street. As you can imagine, obviously I run into a lot of LDS, ran into a few Muslims, this and that. But recently, it seems that actually me and Matt have been running into more atheists. And I guess my question is this. So I know the arguments, cosmological, ontological. I know the arguments, and I can walk them through it. I seem rarely to ever make any ground. In your experience, you have way more experience than I do. I would just maybe like to pick your brain. Have you found something that is effective to maybe help an atheist kind of come out of their cognitive dissonance and realize the error in their thinking? I'm not necessarily saying convince them on the spot God exists, but at least get them to think, wait, what I'm thinking is not logical, and just maybe break down those walls. Obviously, praying for them is a big part of that, and there's a spiritual battle. But
yeah, I don't think the primary reason people are atheists is because they've examined the evidence and concluded that God doesn't exist. I think the reason many people are atheists is because they don't want to be Christians, because they don't want the moral accountability that comes along with it. Now, some of them may have severe doubts that maybe Christianity is true, and I will admit, I think it's much easier to show that God exists than it is to show that Christianity is true. With God exists, you realize if there is an effect known as creation, there's got to be a creator. Who is this God? That's the next question, right? You got a moral law written on your heart, so you know he's moral to some degree. But to discover that Christianity is true, you got to look at historical evidence and see if Jesus really rose from the dead. That takes a little bit more work than to just look around and go, well, if there's a creation, there's got to be a creator. If there's design, there's got to be a designer. If there's a moral lawgiver or a moral law, there's got to be a moral lawgiver. But I think the real problem often isn't evidence, Thomas. I think it's they don't want it to be true, or they had a bad experience with Christians. To which John Dixon, who is a historian down in Australia, says this: when somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame?
The person playing Beethoven.
You don't blame Beethoven. So when someone plays Jesus poorly, who do you blame? You don't blame Jesus. We will not play Jesus perfectly because we are fallen. If we could play Jesus perfectly, we wouldn't need him. If we're perfect, we don't need a Savior. You know, you can get to heaven by being good. You just got to be perfect your whole life. Too late for me. How about you? Yeah. Right? So I would ask them the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? If the person hesitates or says no, the problem isn't here, the problem's here. In fact, with the remaining people we have here, let me just do a quick survey, Thomas. Maybe this will be helpful.
I actually remember you asking that question at University of Utah, and that,
all right.
That was good.
Let me ask the question of everyone in here. Everyone in here who's right now, I want you to think of somebody who's not a Christian, if you're a Christian, who's not a Christian whom you'd like to be a Christian. Friend, relative, somebody like that. Everyone got somebody? Everyone got someone? Okay, don't point at them. All right. Here's my question. Is the person you're thinking of on a relentless pursuit of truth? They want to know if Christianity is true. Or are they apathetic or maybe even hostile? How many say the person I'm thinking of is on a relentless pursuit of truth? They want to know if Christianity is true. 2.5 hands. Really, you're really sure of that, aren't you? You're like, I don't know. No, he's not on a relentless pursuit of truth. We're down to 2. All right, how many people think the person I'm thinking of is apathetic or hostile? Yeah, look around the room, right? It's usually 99 to 1 or 100 to 0. Most people are looking for God like a criminal's looking for a cop. They don't want God to exist. So you could go at people with all sorts of evidence, and they're just going to get more and more annoyed with you because they don't want evidence. They're not interested. So what do you do with somebody like that? You pray for them. You love them, which doesn't mean you approve of everything they do. You plant seeds, and then you wait. And since tragedy strikes all of us at some point, what's going to happen in that person's life at some point is tragedy is going to strike. And if ever there's a time they're going to look to God, it probably will be then your phone's going to ring and that person's going to be on the other end. Now they're ready. They're not going to call their atheist friend when tragedy strikes. What's the atheist friend going to say? Well, stuff just happens. There's no rhyme or reason. No, they're going to call you a person of spiritual depth. When the student's ready, the teacher will appear. So try the evangelism efforts. Ask the question, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And if you ask that question, you're going to be able to diagnose where they are. If they're open, great. Oh, they say, yeah, well, let's do a study together. If they say no, pray, plant seeds, wait. Makes sense? Thanks, Thomas. And thanks for going out and preaching or evangelizing. In fact, one other thing on this, my friend Greg Coco puts it this way. Most of evangelism is gardening, right? Gardening. It's not harvesting, it's gardening. It's planting, watering. Paul said, some plant, some water, God brings the increase, right? So you got to do a lot of gardening before you get to the harvest. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Turek. My name is Joel.
Hey, Joel.
And I just wanted to thank you for your ministry.
Thank you.
And I thank you that you bring the gospel into all of this, because we know this is a battlefield for souls, not just to win an argument.
That's right.
And I also thank you for your stamina, 2.5 hours into this, and you're still going. But my question for you is about the moral argument for the existence of God, which is my favorite argument. But the examples you gave tonight were quite extreme. Torturing babies, Hitler and the Holocaust, and the invasion of Ukraine.
Right.
Big worldwide things, or obviously extreme, horrific
immoral
examples.
Yeah.
That makes sense, and I don't know that anybody would argue against the morality of that. But maybe could you help bring this down to maybe a little bit smaller scale, day-to-day operations of just human life, and how to respond to folks that might say this is just an evolutionary survival mechanism because we need to survive as a species, so therefore we should be good to one another and we shouldn't kill babies, or we shouldn't kill 6 million people.
Well, what they're doing there is they're importing a moral standard into their system when they say that. There's so many reasons why that doesn't work. First of all, you're basically asking, can evolution account for morality? That's what they're suggesting. Right? First of all, notice that moral laws are not chemical or biological. They are immaterial and come from personal agents. There's no mutating genetic code that can tell you what to do. It doesn't have the authority over you to say you ought to act this way rather than that way. Secondly, chemistry and biology are descriptive, not prescriptive. Evolution describes what does survive, not what ought to survive. Why should humans survive? And which humans? The Nazis or the Allies? Who decides? You see, because if there's no standard beyond human beings, then you can't say the Nazis were wrong and the Allies were right, because there's no standard to compare them to. And evolution was exactly what the Nazis used to get rid of the Jews and the homosexuals and the gypsies and the Jehovah's Witnesses, because they said these people are taking resources away from the Uber race. So we need to basically eradicate these people so we can create the Uber race. And in fact, Hitler quoted Darwin in his book Mein Kampf, where he said, well, he was referencing Darwin, I don't know if he quoted him directly, but he was saying, if the weaker races do not wish to fight, they have no right to survive. So they were basically he was basically using Darwinism, survival of the fittest, in order to justify his Holocaust ethic. And to his credit, Richard Dawkins, the top evolutionist and atheist in the world today, or top atheist in the world today, says, I don't want Darwinistic morality. But of course he has no other choice, because he doesn't have a God. Should we rape to survive? If survival is our goal, why shouldn't we rape to survive? Should we murder the weak to help others to survive? That's what the Nazis did. And since evolution is a process of change, then morals must change. Rape may one day be considered good. There are so many problems with the idea that our our morality comes from evolution. The last one is this. They say we have to cooperate with others to get along. Why cooperate when not cooperating often helps you to survive? For example, Stalin. He didn't have to cooperate with a lot of people. He had henchmen, and he murdered millions of his own people. Stalin died on his deathbed, shaking his fist at God one last time at the age of 74. He didn't have to cooperate. He just murdered people who got in his way. So evolution is not a process that gives you morals. What somebody who says that is essentially saying to you is the idea that torturing babies for fun is wrong was given to you by some sort of evolutionary process, so it's not really wrong, even though we think it is. And none of us really believe that. In fact, if evolution has given us our moral ideas, do you know that evolution has given us all of our ideas, including the idea that evolution's true? So why should we believe it's true? So there's a lot of problems with the idea. It just doesn't work. They have to smuggle a moral law into their system to get it to work. Like human beings are valuable and ought to survive. Who said? So that's why it doesn't work.
Thank you.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Thanks, Joel. All right. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name's Caleb.
Caleb. Go ahead, sir.
Oh, yeah. All right. So my question is, I'm a Christian, right? But why would God create the world? Like, it's just looking at it from a perspective, it seems kind of illogical to create something that would, like, sin.
Yeah, like why would God create the Dallas Cowboys? Same thing. First of all, the ultimate answer as to why God created the world, all he says in the text is, for my glory. He didn't have to create the world. He wasn't lonely. God is perfectly self-contained with regard to the Trinity. He didn't have to look for love outside of himself because he had perfect love in the Trinity, a lover, a loved one, and a spirit of love. So God didn't have to create, but as a loving being, he chose to create, to put his image on his creation, and he decided to share that with us, but he didn't have to. Now, we sin, but then God is the one that jumps in and saves us from our sin. He's the one that comes in and takes our punishment on himself. So he knew we would sin, but he also knew he could redeem us. If he doesn't give us free will, then this isn't a moral universe. People say, why doesn't God create a universe where everyone believes? Well, while that might be logically possible, it's not actually achievable with free creatures, because God can't do what's contradictory. He can't force free creatures to do what he wants, because then they wouldn't be free, right? So that would be a contradiction. So God creates this universe knowing how it's going to turn out, but also knowing that he can redeem it. And that's what he does.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Caleb. Angel.
Hi again.
Yes.
So I shared your video and stuff to my brother, who was struggling with knowing whether God was true or not. And he's actually watching live.
Hey, brother.
His name is Braxton.
Braxton?
Yeah, and so he texted me and was like wondering if I could ask this question for him.
So asking for a friend.
Yeah.
That's what we have here, asking for a friend. All right.
A big brother.
Okay.
He said, ask him where a good place to start looking for truth and how to get back towards God when you have turned your back to him.
Wow, I might want to ask him, if I could, why did he turn his back on God? That would be my question. Like, what is the issue that caused him to turn away from God? But if I would start anywhere, it might be the Gospel of John.
Okay.
And to just read the Gospel of John and ask yourself, who is this Jesus person in this Gospel?
Okay.
And
he said he had a little trouble, like, understanding the Bible sometimes.
Oh, I understand that, yeah.
So he was like, well, I'm just kind of nervous about starting that.
Well, it might be a good idea to find a good church like alpinechurch.org and get with some like-minded people and do a study of the Gospel of John then.
Okay.
To learn who Jesus is. And then when you want to go a little bit deeper, then you can go through the book of Romans. And you know, there are so many tools now. Like, for example, free tools online, like Blue Letter Bible. You guys know about Blue Letter Bible? Is that what it's called? Blue Letter Bible? BlueLetterBible.org? I don't know the exact website. But you can get commentaries that are good commentaries on the text. So you might read it and go, I don't really get what's going on here. And then you go read the commentary for people who have studied it a lot more and know the situation and the type of literature and the object of the passage and prescriptive, descriptive, the stuff we talked earlier about, the STOP acronym. Yeah. They've put all that in there, and so you can understand it better when reading something like that. You also might want to read the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, and you might want to read the book The Prodigal God by Tim Keller. The Prodigal God by Tim Keller. Okay. Those two books would be good books to, in addition to reading these Bible books, to try and help you get back toward God.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name's Mark. I was just wondering about your perspective on Cosmic Skeptic's divine hiddenness and the non-resistant non-believer. Does such a person exist?
Yeah, that's a good question. The question, I had a dialogue with Alex O'Connor about 5 years ago in London. Very smart young man, an atheist, but he appears to be at least investigating Christianity more right now. And the idea that if God exists, why are there non-resistant non-believers? In other words, people are claiming that they're open to God, but they can't find God. I would say a couple of things. Number one, keep looking, keep knocking, keep seeking. Secondly, it might be that you haven't found God yet, because at some point in the future you will find God, and all the people you know now you can help bring along when you do know them. If you become a Christian right away, you might break away from those people you know now and never be able to witness to them. But if you develop relationships with them and then you become a Christian later, then you'll have more of an impact. So that may be one reason why they haven't found God yet. The third factor in non-resistant non-belief is I think a lot of times we don't even know our own psychology. I think some people will say I am non-resistant when I really am resistant. I think we can deceive ourselves quite easily. I think we can suppress the truth to the point where we don't even know that we are suppressing the truth. And Paul talks about this in Romans chapter 1. That if you suppress the truth in unrighteousness, God will give you over to a depraved mind to the point where you're not only doing evil things, you're cheering on other people who are doing evil. So I don't think we're as honest as we think we are, or let me put it in a finer way. I don't think we always know if we are being honest, because our faculties may have been degraded by our own suppressing the truth over many years. So,
okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir, what's your name?
My name is Thomas.
Hey, Thomas.
And my question, so you said earlier that there are certain things that God cannot do.
Mm-hmm.
But the Bible says that with God, nothing is impossible.
Mm-hmm.
So how does that work?
Well, nothing that isn't against his nature is impossible. But God couldn't go out of existence, right?
Yeah.
God couldn't become Satan, right? I mean, there are some things God can't do because they go against his nature. So when it says nothing with God is impossible, it's just a flowery way of saying that God is all-powerful. But even God can't do logically impossible things. Even God can't go against his nature. It's not meant to be this broad literal statement. It's just a figurative way of saying that God is extremely powerful.
Okay. Yeah, I understand that.
All right?
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Thomas. Hi, what's your name?
My name is Nathaniel.
Nathaniel, go Mets.
And so I was wondering what you thought about defending yourself in a situation where you were being attacked by someone else. Do you think it's biblically okay to defend yourself and possibly hurt someone?
Why do you ask that?
Because, well, I take self-defense class, which is about street defense. So I was wondering, like the Bible says, when someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn so they can slap you on the other.
Yes.
So do you think that's like literal?
I think it's literal for an insult. I don't think it means that you can't defend yourself against grave bodily harm, because in Jesus' day, a slap in the face meant an insult. It didn't mean that the guy was trying to murder you, okay, or physically harm you. You don't have to return insult for insult. However, the Bible elsewhere talks about Jesus telling his disciples, if you don't have a sword, go buy one. Why do you think he said go buy a sword? For self-defense. So the Bible says you do have the capacity or do have the right to defend yourself, but that doesn't mean you have to if you can avoid the situation. The best thing to do if you're in a situation where you have to defend yourself is to flee from the situation if you can, because you don't want to get involved in a physical or altercation. But if it's unavoidable, you certainly have the right to defend yourself.
Okay, thank you
All
very
right?
much.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. You guys can't stay for 5 hours? I'm really disappointed. All right, just a few more questions, then we got to go. Yes, sir, go ahead.
Hi, Dr. Turek. My name's Jordan.
Hey, Jordan.
I just had a question on an analogy that you give sometimes in response to people who ask about why would God send someone to hell.
Right.
So people who watch you may be familiar with it, but the analogy essentially of a man pursuing a woman, and ultimately if she doesn't want to be pursued, if he loves her, he'll let her go.
Yeah.
God does the same thing. If we don't want a relationship with him, he'll let us go. How would you respond to somebody who says, the analogy is essentially flawed. It's more of a parent-child relationship. Because God knows what's best for us, why is he punishing us when he knows what we don't know? If that makes sense, that he knows that being with him is better. And so a parent to a child, I'm going to do what's better for them, even though they may not want it. So how would you respond to somebody that wants to break down the analogy that way?
Because I reject the premise that it would be better for them to be in God's presence. I think that, in fact, C.S. Lewis has a whole play on this called The Great Divorce. That I know it's fantasy, but I think it makes sense that a group of people who are in hell take a bus ride to heaven and they're complete misfits. They just can't fit in there. And I think we have to realize that people who go to hell are going to be given the appropriate punishment for their sin. They're not all going to be at the same level of torment. It's not torture, by the way, it's torment. They're all going to be at the right level given based on what they've done. In other words, nobody's going to go to hell who's going to go, God, I got a raw deal, I shouldn't be here. In fact, if you look at the one section in the New Testament, Luke 16, which some say is a parable, others say it's not because it uses real names, Lazarus and the rich man and all this, right? The rich man's in Hades, and he's treating Lazarus as he's still his servant. Lazarus is still his servant. And he doesn't say, I shouldn't be here. What does he say?
Lazarus come down.
He says, have Lazarus come down here and put some water on my tongue because I'm in agony in this fire. He doesn't say I shouldn't be here. Sure. Then he says, go tell my brothers about this place. And Jesus says, look, they have Moses and the prophets. If they don't believe them, they won't even believe if somebody rises from the dead. So he's not saying I shouldn't be here. He's not saying I should be out of here. He's saying go warn other people. And Jesus says, they're not going to even believe, even if somebody rises from the dead. So God knows who is redeemable and who isn't. And it doesn't take much faith to believe that omniscience knows who is redeemable and who isn't. So look, there's only two possibilities in the afterlife. Either going to be with God or separated from God. That's it. And if you don't want to be with God, you're going to be separated from God. So I reject the premise that it would be better, whatever better means. I'm going to ask the person who brings up that objection, what do you mean by better? In what sense?
Right.
What does that mean?
Sure.
All right.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, go ahead.
I would just say, like, as a believer, if I believe that being in God's presence is the ultimate purpose for human, that's what we're created for, that if I was an atheist talking to you as a believer to say, if you believe that that is the best thing for a human to be in the presence of God, then wouldn't that be?
Only if the person is receptive to it.
Sure.
In fact, I don't know if I could think about what would be an analogy for this. There are people that, I don't know if this is a good analogy or not, I'm just thinking off the top of my head, but say there's somebody that loves the band Skillet, all right? John Cooper's a friend of mine, and he's a hard-rocking Skillet guy, right?
Yeah.
That's his band. And you might love Skillet, and you want to be in that room with John when he's playing all his Skillet tunes, but your neighbor may detest that music. He would rather be out in the cold, in the rain, and be uncomfortable than to be sitting in a Skillet concert because he detests the music. You might think it's the greatest thing ever, and he says, no, I'd rather be in a place where I'm uncomfortable than to be hearing that music. I don't know if this is a good analogy or not. I'm just trying to think it through, right?
Yeah.
So there are people that would rather be damned and uncomfortable than be saved in the presence of God. I think it was Sartre or someone who said that the gates of hell are locked on the inside, or the doors of hell are locked on the inside. They don't want to be in the presence of God. That turns them off. That they're repulsed by God.
Makes sense.
All
Thank
right?
you.
All right, thanks, appreciate it.
How you doing?
Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Mark.
Hey, Mark.
So I've recently been introduced to presuppositional apologetics.
Yes.
And when I first heard the overview of how it's administered, I immediately thought of your book, Stealing from God. So I wanted to know, do you use presuppositional apologetics at times, or do you think that it is more biblical of an approach to apologetics?
How do you understand presuppositional apologetics?
You start with the
key to
premise
it?
that God exists and that people know that he exists. They just choose to suppress him, as described in Romans. So to approach them trying to build an argument outside of that premise is basically not biblical. You should start with that already in mind.
Okay, no, I don't think that's the right approach.
Okay.
And because, as I understand presuppositional apologetics, some of them will say you even have to assume the Bible's true, right? And what I would say back to them is, well, why aren't you a Muslim then? Muslims believe in God. Why don't you just accept the Quran rather than the Bible? And normally the person will say, well, because there's evidence for the Bible. Now, as soon as they say that, now they're back to doing apologetics.
Right.
Now they're back to doing the classical approach, which is what
Right.
we try and do here.
Right.
To differentiate between the revelation called the Bible and the supposed revelation called the Quran. The only way you can differentiate those two is to bring evidence to bear.
Right.
Not just to say, well, I'm going to assume God exists. Well, which God are you going to pick?
Right. Right.
So it doesn't appear to work for me in that regard. I don't see any problem talking about evidence. In fact, Jesus talked about evidence. Remember when John the Baptist is in prison and he sends an emissary to Jesus. He's starting to have doubts in prison. And he sends an emissary to Jesus and he says to Jesus, the emissary says, hey, John wants to know, are you the Messiah or should we wait for somebody else? Well, what does Jesus tell the emissary to tell John? You go tell John to stop asking questions and just have faith.
Right.
No, he doesn't say that. He says, look at the signs.
Right.
In other words, Jesus is an evidentialist. He's saying, look at the signs that demonstrate that I'm the Messiah. People are healed. People are risen from the dead.
Right.
He's the Messiah.
Sounds good.
All right? Thanks. And that guy gets a hand for coming all the way down to the mic. Right there. Thanks, Mark. All right, final question. Here it is. Yes, sir. What's your name?
My name is Thaddeus, and my question is related to like what you were saying about the New Testament. Like the eyewitness accounts and stuff make the New Testament seem very true. What if somebody wrote it so it would seem true, and they used those tactics?
You're basically saying this could be an historical novel. That somebody just used all modern or all contemporaries of the day and wrote a fictional story to try and invent this. First of all, that genre was not known at that time. Okay. Secondly, we have evidence that shows that these people really did exist, and if people like the New Testament writers were saying false things about these powerful people like Pilate and the Herods, that would not bode well for them if those people found out about it. Okay? So it doesn't seem to make any sense that people would invent this. And then for what reason? Look, Jesus of Nazareth is the most influential human being in the history of the world. Are we going to say that that human being was a completely fictional character, and yet he impacted the world unlike any other human being in history? It would be like saying that 2,000 years from now, Luke Skywalker will be thought of as an historical figure, and his impact will have the most dramatic impact of any other human being over the past 2,000 years. Does anyone here think that that's plausible to believe, that 2,000 years from now, people will take a fictional character called Luke Skywalker and say he really existed and he's impacted the world more than anyone else? No. That's not going to happen.
But, like, what if obviously from the writer's perspective, if the people we think who wrote the New Testament, what if they didn't write the New Testament? Because a lot of this is based on the fact that if they wrote it, they would have all these problems. What if they didn't write it?
Well, who did write it then?
I don't know.
Why would you take the skepticism that says they didn't write it when, in fact, the best evidence suggests that, let's just take the Gospels, for example, which are the most, hang on a second, I'm looking for a slide here. These are the books that are the most disputed as to who wrote. Nobody denies that Paul wrote his works, especially the 7 that are all accepted. But let's take a look at Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Okay? Why do we think these people wrote them? Now, notice Matthew, Mark, and John are Jews. Luke is not. Okay? First of all, if you look at the confirmation from authors at the time, Tertullian, who lived in 207, Clement of Alexandria, 180, Irenaeus of Lyons, 180, the Muratorian fragment is 170, Justin Martyrs, 150, Papias, 125. They're saying that these are the writers of the Gospels. Secondly, there's only one human link separating John, who obviously wrote John, from Irenaeus, and that was Polycarp. So these people are very close. It would be like someone saying, my grandfather did X. That's how close they were in terms of writing the documents. Claims are from every quarter of the Roman Empire. So it's not just one area that people are saying that these are the 4 authors of the 4 Gospels. Every area of the Roman Empire, there are people writing saying these are the 4 people. There are no rival claims about authorship. Nobody is saying that these people were not the people that wrote the Gospels. And finally, these are unlikely inventions. Why would you say that, say, Mark wrote the Gospel of Mark when Peter, the name Peter would have carried a lot more weight, right? I mean, people would have, he was the primary apostle, yet notice Peter doesn't write a gospel, he writes 2 letters. If I want to pass off information and get people to believe it, I'm going to say Peter wrote it. I'm not going to pick Luke either. You know, Luke's not even an eyewitness. I mean, he's an eyewitness with Paul, but he's not an eyewitness of Jesus. So why am I picking Luke to write a gospel? In other words, if you were making this up, you wouldn't pick these names. You might pick Matthew and John, but you wouldn't pick Mark and Luke. So there's no reason for them to invent that these were the names of the writers of the New Testament. In every manuscript we have that has a title page, it always has the gospel according to Mark, Luke, John, or Matthew. This idea that the Gospels were anonymous is nonsense. We've never found a manuscript with a title page that didn't have the name on it. All right? So the best evidence we have are these are the people that wrote them. And if they didn't write them, the guy who, say, wrote Matthew, he really knew Jewish culture, didn't he? Because it's written to the Jews. He quotes the Old Testament more than anybody else. The first 5 chapters of Matthew are a reenactment of Israel and Jesus. Jesus is the true Israel. I mean, I'll try and do this from memory. It's late, but how does the book of Matthew start? It starts with a genealogy. How does Genesis start, or I should say Exodus? It starts with a genealogy. What happens in Exodus and Pharaoh? We got to kill all the babies. What happens in Matthew with Herod? We got to kill all the babies, right? Jesus, gee, it's late. It's midnight my time. I'm trying to think this through, ladies and gentlemen. Everything that happens in Exodus, or major events that happen in Exodus, happen in the first five chapters of Matthew. Notice that Israel escapes to Egypt to escape a famine. Where does Jesus escape to escape Herod?
Also Egypt.
He goes also to Egypt. Then, once Herod dies, Jesus comes out of Egypt, and once Moses goes to the Pharaoh, he takes his people out of Egypt. Then he goes and he wanders in the wilderness for 40 years, Moses and the Israelites. Where does Jesus go? He wanders in the desert for 40 days. And he's tempted by who? Satan. Whereas the Israelites are tempted, they give in. Jesus is tempted, he doesn't give in. Then the Israelites go to Mount Sinai, and God opens his mouth and he gives the 10 Commandments. Jesus goes to the mount in Galilee, and the first verse of chapter 5 of Matthew, it says, he opens his mouth and he began to teach. Do you see the parallel? God speaks on the mountain in Exodus. Jesus speaks on the mountain in Galilee. In other words, he's God. The parallels that Matthew is drawing from Exodus is showing that he's a Jew and he knows Jewish culture, he knows Jewish history, and he's trying to convince the Jews that Jesus is the true Israel. Jesus succeeds where Israel doesn't.
That's really cool.
So this is not an invented storyline. This was written by a Jew. Make sense?
Yes.
All right. By the way, go to our YouTube channel, because we did a teaching on this just a few weeks ago in Israel, and look for the one that says the Sermon on the Mount, what they never taught you about the Sermon on the Mount. Because I go through this when I remembered it. I can hardly remember it now because it's midnight. So I'm losing it. All right? So friends, thank you for being here. Thank you for staying so late. Thanks to the folks out there. Next, where are we going to be? Next Wednesday night? Next Wednesday night, we're going to be at Wingate University near Charlotte, North Carolina for I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Hope to see you right here. God bless. Thanks.